Chapter 381. Yin and Yang, 5 elements, 6 lines, 8 trigrams. The 5 elements reinforced and restrained each other. The 5 elements did not simply refer to the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It referred to a cultivator's basic understanding of the laws of heaven and earth. Only by understanding the 5 elements, Yin and Yang, could one officially step into the door of immortality. Among the 5 elements, thunder represented the Zhen trigram, which was wood. Even a blind man could see that Wushu's cultivation method was based on earth. Therefore, Jiang Yan did not even need to think too much, and directly took out the Jiang clan's trump card, 9 Heavens Thunder Technique. At that moment, Jiang Yan, who held the thunder in his hand, was so powerful that it almost completely suppressed Wushu's limelight. Seeing this, Wushu's face suddenly revealed a trace of a sinister smile. Without hesitation, he took out another magic treasure from his Sumera mustard seed bag, White Bone Soul Summoning Banner. Then, with the flag in his right hand and the banner in his left hand, he continued to rush in the direction of Jiang Yan. It had to be mentioned here, there was actually a difference between a banner and a flag. A flag was hung horizontally like a national flag, while a banner was hung vertically. Horizontal as a flag, vertical as a banner. There seemed to be no difference between the two, but in reality, there was a big difference. That was because the flag was Yang, and the banner was Yin. Therefore, the moment Wushu took out the White Bone Soul Summoning Banner, a black gas suddenly surged out from his body, as if thousands of vengeful spirits were flowing within. With one hand, the apricot yellow flag was mighty and righteous. With the other, the White Bone Soul Summoning Banner was awe-inspiring. Since Jiang Yan wanted to use the 5 elements to restrain him, then he might as well combine Yin and Yang, and directly surpass the 5 elements. Under the contrast of one good and one evil, one Yin and one Yang. Wushu was like a combination of gods and demons, brazenly facing the 9 heavens thunder in Jiang Yan's hands. A battle between Yuan Yin and Yang. Thunder against Yin and Yang earth. This battle was so exciting that it could be said to be a once-in-a-lifetime event. However, just as Shushan Island was collapsing and the sky was darkening, Jiang Jingqing's figure quietly appeared on Qixia Peak. As the Jiang clan's only celestial being, he did not follow the old ancestor to face the great enemy together. Instead, he came here to find Jiang Yuankui. As soon as he stepped into the ancestral hall, he saw Jiang Yuankui kneeling in front of the Jiang clan's ancestral tablets with a stupefied expression. It was unknown what he was thinking. Seeing this, Jiang Jingqing couldn't help but fly into a rage. He directly grabbed Jiang Yuankui's collar and lifted him up from the ground. The Jiang clan is currently facing a great calamity. For this reason, the old ancestor did not hesitate to save up for 1,000 years. He possessed Feng Yan just to mediate with that thief for a moment. But you, as the patriarch, are unable to recover from this setback. Could it be that you want to watch as that bastard kills all of my Jiang clan's clansmen in order to resolve the hatred in your heart? For a father, what kind of blow would the pain of losing a child be? Not to mention the ordinary people, even Jiang Yuankui, who was the clan leader, had completely lost his soul under this blow. Therefore, after hearing Jiang Jingqing's reprimand, Jiang Yuankui smiled bitterly and said, "Second granduncle must be joking. Yuankui's strength is low. Even if I go, I can only stand on the side and cheer for old ancestor." Slap. Before Jiang Yuankui could finish his words, Jiang Jingqing slapped him in the face and sent him flying more than 10 meters away. He even slid on the ground for a long time before finally coming to a stop after hitting a pillar. "I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. Let me tell you. The Jiang clan is facing a great calamity. If old ancestor can't defeat that bastard, even if I have to run away before the battle, I will come back and kill you first." Hearing this, Jiang Yuankui lay on the ground without moving. It seemed that his heart was already dead. Seeing him like this, Jiang Jingqing was furious. Just as he was about to go up and hit Jiang Yuankui to wake him up, a series of shocking rumbles suddenly came from outside the house. Like an earthquake, the entire Daiyu island trembled, and the tiles of the ancestral temple rustled and fell. Obviously, the battle had reached its climax. Since the battle was so fierce, Jiang Jingqing, who was the main force, naturally did not dare to delay for too long. Therefore, he could only stomp his foot hard and leave a sentence before turning around and flying out of the ancestral temple. Old ancestor asked me to pass on a message to you. If you care about the Jiang clan's tens of thousands of years of foundation, then stand up and think of a way to find a strong ally for the Jiang clan to solve the current crisis. Jiang Jingqing left. After a long while, Jiang Yuankui crawled up from the ground with some difficulty. Strong ally? Even though Jiang Jingqing did not say who that person was, Jiang Yuankui instantly understood the old ancestor's meaning. However, he did not act immediately. Instead, he stood where he was and seriously thought about it. In fact, Jiang Yuankui had been very clear-headed the whole time. And because he was clear-headed, he had always had a question in his heart. Everything that was happening now, was it all part of the old ancestor's plan? Perhaps the possession of Feng Yan was also part of it? This was a very scary guess, and it made Jiang Yuankui shudder. He could not be sure. He could not be sure. That was because, after all, the blood of the Jiang clan still flowed in his body. Jiang Yuankui hesitated for a while with a complicated expression. In the end, he still could not cut off the fetters that originated from the depths of his bloodline. He turned around and walked toward the back of the ancestral temple. From the perspective of communication technology, modern technology had indeed surpassed immortal cultivation techniques. Jiang Yuankui was only a diviner. Therefore, if he wanted to instantly contact Qin Shi on the other side of the world, other than a phone call, Jiang Yuankui really could not think of any other way. Fortunately, Qin Shi had left his phone number before. Otherwise, Jiang Yuankui really would not be able to call the heavens or the earth. When the phone rang, Qin Shi was busy in the courtyard counting the medicinal ingredients. He was preparing to officially start refining medicine at night after Ninian fell asleep. Hello? Who is this? Mr. Chen, it's me, Jiang Yuankui. As soon as the call connected, Jiang Yuankui's slightly hoarse voice sounded from the other end of the phone. Hearing this, Qin Shi immediately raised his eyebrows. After glancing at the adumbra flower, he prepared to smile and say a few words of courtesy to Jiang Yuankui. However, before he could speak, Jiang Yuankui anxiously said, "The Jiang clan is in danger. Sir, please lend us a hand." Then, Jiang Yuankui quickly recounted the situation on Daiyu Island. After hearing this, Qin Shi's face showed a hint of surprise. If they did not use an atomic bomb, even if the entire Wu Lian came out, they would not be able to do anything to the Jiang clan. He had already killed one heavenly general and captured 3 alive. Why was the 5th one so powerful all of a sudden? It was not that Qin Shi looked down on Bai Hong. The main reason was that the old man from the Jiang clan was too cunning. Therefore, Qin Shi did not think that the heavenly general would be able to gain any advantage from the old man. Looking at the situation now, the Jiang clan seemed to be unable to hold on any longer. Was that why they were asking him for help? Alright, you guys hold on. I'll be there soon. In any case, he had taken something good from them. Naturally, Qin Shi could not leave them in the lurch. Therefore, he agreed to Jiang Yuankui's request. He wanted to take this opportunity to see for himself. Chapter 382. After explaining the situation to Qin Ruoying, Qin Shi set off for Daiyu Island. As soon as he got close to the waters around Daiyu Island, the sky suddenly darkened. Thunder and lightning intertwined, and torrential rain poured down. Thick fog rolled and rose from the surface of the sea, and the sea looked as if a tsunami was approaching. The waves surged over one after another, as if thousands of soldiers and horses were screaming, charging, and fighting. From time to time, waves soared into the sky, creating splashes of water that were more than 10 feet high. It was a spectacular sight that could not be described with words. Because the Jiang family had activated the protective array, even Qin Shi could not see what was going on inside. When he forcibly broke open a crack in the array and was about to enter, a surging and violent wave of spirit chi suddenly surged out from the crack. Chen Shi only sensed it briefly, but he frowned on the spot. This was the remnant aura after the great battle. At the same time, there were two distinct waves of true origin in this aura. This meant that the battle had reached its climax, and both parties did not even bother to restrain themselves. That was why so much spirit chi had leaked out. Chen Shi could only hope that the old man could hold on for a while longer. After all, he was not here to collect the Jiang family's corpse. Thinking of this, Chen Shi couldn't help but speed up his movements. With a flash, his entire person directly entered the grand formation. As soon as he entered the array, he saw a field of wildfire, thick smoke, and dilapidated walls. Daiyu Island, where was the beautiful and spectacular sight that Chen Shi had seen when he first came here? Shushan Island, which was located at the westernmost tip of Daiyu Island, had half a mountain cut off. Many Jiang family members who were lucky enough to survive could only hold on to broken logs and cry in the sea. The island was shattered, and the mountain was flattened. The wildfire lit up the forest, and thick smoke filled the sky. The 17 islands of Daiyu Island, there were only 1 or 2 that had not been affected by the great battle. It could be said that heaven and earth had lost their color, and all living things were crying out in grief. It was a scene of misery and suffering. Rumble. Rumble. The battle was not over yet. Every time Wuxiu and Jiang Yan clashed, the shockwaves produced by the collision of their Jin Yuan would instantly destroy everything around them. Thunder continued to rumble, and the earth trembled violently. This scene was very similar to the carpet bombing tactics of World War II. Thus, compared to the Jiang clan's people in the sky, the Jiang clan's people with shallow cultivations below were the ones who were truly living in fear. They would never know when the next wave of attacks would befall them. They watched as their loved ones fell one after another in the aftermath of the great battle, or were directly smashed into meat paste by the dissipating true essence. The pitiful Jiang clansmen could only hug each other and cry bitterly. The Celestials couldn't protect them, and the old ancestor couldn't save them. Who else could save them? Blood flowed like a river and corpses piled up into mountains. Tens of thousands of people were in grief, their wails shaking the heavens. Looking at the tragic scenes in front of him, Chen Shi, who was used to living in a civilized society, felt a little uncomfortable for a moment. Although he had only returned for a little over a year, he felt that he had been away from that cruel world for far too long. Until this moment, he finally found the feeling he had back then. The battle between Yuanyin was indeed more terrifying than he had imagined. Both of them were experts. Experts naturally didn't need to be compassionate, nor did they need to be overcautious. However, looking at the grief-stricken mortals below, combined with what he had seen and heard during this period of time, Chen Shi couldn't help but have a question in his mind. Strength and weakness were relative. Compared to humans, ants were extremely insignificant. But compared to immortal cultivators, what was the difference between an ordinary person and an ant? At this moment, Chen Shi suddenly had an epiphany and completely forgot where he was. He actually fell into deep thought just like that. Strength was divided into strong and weak. All living things were equal. Even if they were as insignificant as ants, as a life between heaven and earth, they should receive the least amount of respect. In front of humans, ants were insignificant. But in front of planets like Tianxian or Earth, weren't humans also insignificant and insignificant? Any wave of tides was enough to affect all life on this planet. The dinosaurs were extinct. The ancient immortal cultivators were lucky enough to escape. In front of heaven and earth, all living things were equal. Whether it was the ant selling vegetables on the street or him, the divine Lord of Dawn, what was the difference between the two in essence? Cultivation was a kind of detachment. In that case, what level of cultivation did he have to reach before he could be considered an absolute expert? Chen Shi floated quietly in midair. Suddenly, his heart trembled violently. Immediately after, a feeling of enlightenment rushed into Chen Shi's heart. Through the accumulated tribulations of the mystifying scripture, he was enlightened in an instant. Understanding one's heart and seeing one's nature. Enlightenment. He hadn't had this feeling for a long time. Under such circumstances, under such conditions, he could actually have an epiphany? One had to know that epiphany was a very mysterious thing. It had nothing to do with cultivation, but it was extremely important and would be of great help to cultivation. Although he didn't comprehend the true essence of the word void, for Chen Shi, this was already a great blessing. He even had a vague feeling that he might not be far from the insightful emptiness realm. Just one more step, as long as he understood the word void, he would be able to step into the insightful emptiness realm. Thinking of this, Chen Shi couldn't help but be overjoyed. He subconsciously raised his head to the sky and let out a long howl. His voice was full of joy. But this joy was obviously somewhat out of place with the atmosphere on Daiyu Island. Wuxiu and Jiang Yan's 5 senses were very sharp. Even though they were fighting fiercely, both of them noticed this extremely discordant howl. Mr. Chen? When Jiang Yan saw the figure in the distance clearly, he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. One had to know that Jiang Yan had been reincarnated through possession. After several rounds of fierce fighting, his body was already somewhat overwhelmed and could explode and die at any time. When that time came, who in this huge Jiang clan would be able to stop Wuxiu for a moment? Therefore, after seeing Chen Shi's figure, Jiang Yan was suddenly very excited. It had to be said that the 3 words Mr. Chen did indeed have a strange magic power. After Jiang Yan blurted out these 3 words in a moment of excitement, the scene became strangely quiet. The Jiang clan celestials all looked in the direction their ancestor was pointing. Even Wuxiu, he actually stopped fighting temporarily and turned to look in Chen Shi's direction. In an instant, Chen Shi had become the focus of everyone's attention. Seeing this, Chen Shi suddenly came back to his senses and finally remembered why he was here. Sorry, I'm late. Chapter 383. This was how Mr. Chen, who was the center of attention, appeared in the sky above Daiyu Island. Then, he flew to Jiang Jingqing's side. Perhaps it was because he had just had an epiphany, but Chen Shi was in a good mood. He even nodded at Jiang Jingqing. Seeing this, Jiang Jingqing smiled bitterly and shook his head. Mr. Chen was in a good mood. The mood of this group of people was very heavy. Hey, where's your ancestor? Is he okay? After all, Chen Shi owed him a favor. Naturally, he had to express his gratitude. But he looked left and right, but did not see Jiang Yan's figure, which was why he asked this question. I'm here. Mr. Meng, I'm very happy that you're concerned about me. Hearing this, Jiang Yan forced a smile and responded. At this time, Chen Shi finally noticed the young man beside him. If he remembered correctly, this young man was the one who wanted to take the Adumbra flower away from him. Wait a minute, this kid was not even a diviner, right? How did he become so powerful after not seeing him for a few days? Feeling the surge of true origin in Jiang Yan's body, even Chen Shi could not help but be stunned for a moment. Immediately after that, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He could not help but ask tentatively, bloodline possession? You're very knowledgeable, Mr. Meng. Hearing this, Jiang Yan nodded straightforwardly, confirming his guess. The so-called bloodline possession was actually a taboo technique. It went against the rules, so it was not tolerated by the world. A very simple example could be given. If a grandfather took away his grandson's body, how should the father address his son? Should he address his son's body as his father? Or should he address his father's soul as his son? No matter who it was, they would not be able to accept such a strange thing. But even so, bloodline possession was still a common occurrence. After all, compared to outsiders, the possessor and the possessor shared the same bloodline. After possession, it was naturally easier for the possessor to unleash his original strength. Looking at Jiang Fengyan, who had a young face but was extremely mature in his behavior, Jiang Fengyan felt a chill run down his spine. Chen Shi was speechless. However, this was someone else's family matter after all. As an outsider, he had no right to interfere. In fact, Chen Shi had long felt that this old man was very sinister, but he did not expect this old man to be even more sinister than he had imagined. The old man had used the soul crystal to live for thousands of years. Qin thought that he had taken over the body, so he could only stay in the soul crystal for the rest of his life. He didn't expect the old man to have such a trick up his sleeve. It wasn't until today that he seized his great-great-great-grandson's body. Jiang Fengyan was a good material. He could be considered to have excellent aptitude. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to take half a step into the Deva realm at such a young age. With such aptitude, if placed in the heavenly jade domain, no matter which sect, he would be listed as a core disciple. Thinking of this, Qin couldn't help but come up with a guess. Could it be, the old man had predicted that with the revival of spirit qi, there was a perfect candidate for possession, so he simply took advantage of this opportunity to seize Jiang Fengyan's body openly? He trapped himself in the soul crystal and tortured himself for thousands of years, just to welcome the glory of tomorrow? What a vicious heart. What a deep mind. People who were vicious to others were not scary. People who were vicious to themselves were the ones who were truly scary. Qin's mind was in a whirl, but his face did not show any abnormality. His conversation with Jiang Yan was short, so it did not take up too much time. After saying that, Qin turned his gaze to Wushu. After all, this was his real enemy. It had to be said that the atmosphere above Daiyu Island was somewhat stifling. Wushu was still holding 2 flags in his hands, flying alone not far away from the Jiang family. A dignified divine general of Tiandu was now covered in injuries, and he no longer had the sage-like aura he had before. However, even Wushu's body emitted a sense of exhaustion, let alone the Jiang clan's people. Qin only took a cursory glance, and found that the Jiang family's pride of 300 divine warriors had been reduced to just over 100. Moreover, they all looked dispirited, and there was even some despair and fear in their eyes. It was obvious that the Jiang family had paid a heavy price in this battle. It could be said that they had suffered a great loss. If it wasn't for his appearance that made the 2 sides stop fighting for a while. Then it would not be long before, then, Daiyu Island would be completely wiped off the map by Wushu. Alright, you guys go and rest. Leave this to me. Qin twisted his neck, and after saying that, he directly flew forward a short distance, leaving himself to face Wushu alone. This action clearly showed his attitude. Swap. From now on, Wushu's enemy was no longer the Jiang family, but him, Qin Mr. Qin. Actually, Qin's idea was very simple. No matter what secrets were hidden, when the spirit energy tide appeared, Ying would feel dizzy and sick. It was also because Ying would feel dizzy and sick that he had to avoid this situation. How could he avoid it? Wasn't it just to disperse the spirit energy tide? Other than that, whether it was Tiandu or the Jiang family, it had nothing to do with him. In short, as long as he was on Earth, the spirit energy tide would not appear for a day. But, if the spirit energy tide did not appear, how could the heavenly gate open? How would the generals of Tiandu descend on Earth? This was simply a paradox. Therefore, it was destined that Qin would stand on the opposite side of Tiandu. Unless, Tiandu took the initiative to hand over the heaven-bearing efficacious floating mirror so that Qin could check the secrets in it and completely cure Ying's dizziness. Otherwise, there was no way this matter could be resolved peacefully. A 9th-grade spirit treasure in each hand, where is Gao Shuifu? Qin looked at Wushu from head to toe. After seeing that Wushu was covered in high-grade spirit treasures, he could not help but laugh and tease him. Just this alone was enough to show that Wushu's status was much higher than Baihong's. Therefore, Qin was very interested in Wushu. He wanted to bring Wushu back to the underwater cave, light a candle, prepare a whip, and interrogate him. Wushu did not speak. He had been silently sizing up Qin. Even after Qin spoke, the expression on his face didn't change. Seeing that he did not speak, Qin asked very generously, "You guys have been fighting for so long, do you want to rest for a while? Take some medicine to nourish your body or something?" "No need." Wushu finally spoke. Qin thought that he was going to continue fighting, so he shook his right hand and the flowing cloud sword flew out from his back. Then come, don't say that I bullied you. I'll let you have 3 moves first. Go ahead, I promise I won't fight back. After saying that, Qinshi held the long sword in his hand and made an inviting gesture. Hearing that, Wushu still did not attack. Without seeing him do anything, the Wuji apricot yellow flag and the white-boned soul beckoning banner in his hands suddenly disappeared, which made Qinshi envious. Sumera mustard seed bag? Tall, rich, and handsome indeed. Qinshi thought that Wushu was going to change his spirit treasures. But after a while, he only saw Wushu rubbing his face with his hand and then showing a dispirited expression. I'm not fighting anymore, I'm already giving Yu Huan Tianzun enough face. I'm tired, let's call it a day, Mr. Chen, right? My name is Wushu. We'll meet again someday, see you next time. Until then. Wushu finally returned to his previous sloppy self. In fact, he did not even think about fighting with Qinshi. Because he knew very well what he was capable of. Even if Wushu was in his best condition, he did not want to fight with Qinshi, let alone now. The reason why he stayed here was mainly because he wanted to see Qinshi. Now that he had seen him, he knew his name. It was time for him to leave. There was bound to be a day when they would meet again. As soon as he finished speaking, Wushu was like a pile of quicksand. He turned into thousands of grains of sand and slowly drifted away with the wind. Seeing that, Qinshi frowned and suddenly slashed at the quicksand with his sword. Chapter 384. Under Qinshi's watch, Wushu suddenly turned into a cloud of dust and dissipated in front of everyone's eyes. Qinshi had come all the way here and had barely exchanged a few words. How could he allow this guy to escape so easily? Therefore, the moment Wushu's figure dissipated, Qinshi drew his sword. As soon as the sword was drawn, the sky suddenly darkened. The long sword turned invisible, and the twilight in the sky silently closed. Heaven and earth were silent. It was as if only one person, one sword, and one grain of sand were left. This was the earth escape technique of the 5 elements. It was also the escape technique that Wushu was proud of. As soon as this technique was drawn, Wushu's entire body was like thousands of dust and gravel in the air. It was invisible and unfathomable. But it was a pity, Wushu had underestimated Qinshi's strength. If he had left before Qinshi arrived, Dayu Island would have been like his back garden. He could come and go as he pleased. Since Qinshi was already here, it was destined that he would not be able to be as relaxed as before. Qinshi still used the first move of the moonlight sword technique. The sword hid the void. Before the sword was drawn, the sword aura was hidden and not released. As soon as the sword was drawn, it was like a long river hanging upside down, soaring into the sky and into the clouds. Its speed was so fast that it was simply shocking. Jiang Jingqing was completely stunned by this sword. Even when he was chased by Qinshi's flying sword all over the sky before, he did not feel that Mr. Chen was much stronger than he was. Until he saw this sword, Jiang Jingqing finally understood the gap between himself and Mr. Chen. It was like the gap between heaven and earth. The move was still the same move. However, in the past year or so, Qinshi's condition had improved qualitatively. The demeanor of a divine lord was completely displayed at this moment. After Qinshi slashed out with her sword, the sword light suddenly transformed into thousands of identical sword shadows as it flew through the air. These sword shadows didn't look very real, as if they didn't really exist in this world, so people mistakenly thought that. These sword shadows were only the refraction of light, which was why they formed the illusion of one real sword and 10,000 fake swords. It looked like a kaleidoscope. Of all the people present, only Jiang Yan knew what was good for him. Marvelous, truly marvelous, Jiang Yan let out a heartfelt sigh. At this time, the sword gleam and the thousands of sword shadows had already arrived at Wushu's previous location. One grain of sand, one world, one leaf, one Bodhi. Since Wushu was trying to split himself into thousands of clones and escape from Qinshi's sight using the Earth Escape technique, Qinshi decided to use the Earth Escape technique. In that case, Qinshi could only unleash 10,000 swords simultaneously, using the real sword to lock onto Wushu's chi dynamic, and the virtual sword to sweep through all things. Not a single grain of sand was spared. Bang! There was a silent and violent explosion. It was as if a piece of the sky had been forcefully ripped out, leaving a strange vacuum zone in the sky above Daiyu Island. In this vacuum, there was no air, no dust, and even the sunlight seemed to be frozen. And this was clearly the real, a sword concealing the void. Crack. Suddenly, the sky cracked open like a broken mirror. The light in that position began to distort, and a figure appeared out of thin air in the originally empty sky. First, it was a pair of legs, then thighs, waist, chest, neck, and finally, head. Wushu's figure slowly appeared. You? Wushu stared at his own body with wide eyes, and his face suddenly revealed an expression as if he had seen a ghost. To put it bluntly, this was the ultimate life-saving technique that he relied on to survive. How could it be so easily broken by Qinshi? At this moment, Wushu was really panicking. It's still so early, my daughter hasn't even finished school, why are you in such a hurry? After twirling his sword around, Qinshi said to him with a smile. Wushu was silent. After taking a deep look at Qinshi, he said with a solemn expression, Impossible, it's impossible for someone like you to appear in the lower realm. You, where did you come from? Wushu looked at Qinshi with a strange expression. But after Qinshi heard this, she only smiled and didn't care at all. Me? I came from Shangjing. He was born and raised on Earth, so why would he need to explain himself to anyone? Wushu did not believe him, but he did not argue with him. Instead, he quietly took out the white bone spirit summoning banner from his summer mustard bag. It seemed like he had accepted his fate. Since he could not run, he could only fight. Seeing this, Qinshi nodded with a smile and signaled him to make his move. The battle was about to begin. The members of the Jiang family held their breaths and looked at them nervously. They had already changed from participants to spectators. However, just when everyone thought that Wushu was going to start fighting, Wushu suddenly did something that shocked everyone. After he took out the white bone spirit summoning banner, he slapped himself hard on the chest, causing himself to spit out a mouthful of blood. The blood stained the banner, making the patterns on the banner even more eerie. Blood sacrifice? After seeing Wushu use his blood to dye the white bone spirit summoning banner red, even Qinshi could not help but stop smiling. His expression became more serious because of this. After all, the blood that Wushu spat out was not simple. That was his blood essence. Since cultivators could unleash power beyond normal by burning their blood essence, then similarly, if one used their blood essence to feed a magic treasure, it would be able to unleash power beyond its current level. Therefore, when Wushu's blood essence splashed onto the banner, a terrifying murderous aura exploded from the white bone spirit summoning banner. In an instant, the Wushu flag was like a drop of ink in water. Countless black smoke gushed out from the flag and spread rapidly. The black smoke quickly covered the sky. At this moment, Wushu's voice sounded from the black smoke. You're giving me 3 moves, right? If that's the case, I won't be polite with you. Wushu is here, please enlighten me, mister. Following Wushu's roar, a surge of true essence surged out of the black smoke. Due to his previous promise, Qinshi could only use his sword to protect himself. His body lit up with a golden light, wanting to use it to block Wushu's attack. However, the violent impact that Qinshi imagined did not come. In his perception, the true essence in Wushu's body was like air in a balloon. Because it was so large, even the balloon burst. Then, the true origin energy surged out in all directions in a ring shape. Qinshi was stunned. Because he did not understand what Wushu's move was. Could it be that he was here to perform a fairy scattering flower? Qinshi was puzzled. Suddenly, he shuddered, and then suddenly came back to his senses. No. This guy is trying to escape. This time, it was really Qinshi's turn to be nervous. Not to mention anything else, if he really let Wushu escape from under his nose, he would lose a lot of face. Thinking of this, Qinshi immediately waved the sword in his hand. The sword light immediately shot out like the rising sun. Thousands of golden clusters of light instantly dispersed the black smoke and illuminated the entire sky. Unfortunately, Qin Shi's reaction was still a beat slower. After the feint, Wu Su had long disappeared from his sight. Chapter 385. Of the 36 stratagems, escape was the best stratagem. Wushu slipped away quietly in front of Qin Shi's eyes. Looking in the direction Wushu disappeared in, Qin Shi finally came back to his senses after a long while. He burned his blood essence and then put on such a grand display. In the end, it was all to escape. This was a little awkward. Qin Shi turned around and glanced at the Jiang family, only to find that everyone was looking at him expressionlessly. I'm sorry, we let him escape. It was a mistake. Since he had already escaped, it was impossible for Qin Shi to catch up no matter how much he wanted to. At this point, Qin Shi could only sheath his long sword with an awkward expression and sincerely apologize to the Jiang family. Although he did not do anything wrong. Looking at the defeated soldiers in front of him and the wildfire raging on Daiyu Island below, Qin Shi still felt a little apologetic. After all, Wushu's trip had greatly damaged Daiyu Island's vitality. Although he had arrived in time to save the Jiang family, as long as Wushu successfully escaped, it meant that this was actually a meaningless and crushing defeat. They had lost more than 100 heavenly beings, but in the end, they only managed to get the other party to escape unscathed. No matter who it was, they would not be able to accept this result. Therefore, after confirming that Divine General Wushu had successfully escaped, the Jiang family had a complicated expression on their faces. They did not dare to blame Qin Shi. After all, Qin Shi had just saved their lives. But at the same time, they could not help but curse in their hearts. If Mr. Chen had not been so arrogant just now, Wushu's head would probably have been placed in front of the ancestral tablets by now. Because of this thought, the Jiang family could not help but feel a little dejected. They even felt disheartened. 300 heavenly beings could not deal with a divine general. When this person recovered from his injuries and returned to Daiyu Island for revenge, how were the remaining 100 or so people supposed to stop him? When the time came, were they not fishes on the chopping board? Whether they were killed or cut off completely depended on Wushu's mood. Everyone's faces were clouded with worry, and their hearts were filled with anxiety. At this critical moment, perhaps only old ancestor Jiang Yan could still respond to Qin Shi with a smile. Thank you, Mr. Chen. If you hadn't arrived in time, I'm afraid the lives of this old man and the tens of thousands of Jiang clansmen on Daiyu Island would have been in danger. Such a great favor is like giving birth to a new life. Speaking to here, Jiang Yan suddenly bowed towards Qin Shi, then said extremely solemnly, Jiang Yan is here. On behalf of the entire Jiang clan, I thank Mr. for saving my life. Since the elder ancestor had expressed his opinion, no matter how uncomfortable everyone was, they could only bow to Qin Shi and say, thank you for saving our lives, Mr. Seeing this, Qin Shi also said politely with an awkward expression, everyone, please rise. It's just a small matter. Everyone, there's no need to be so polite. Hearing this, Jiang Yan straightened his body, then lamented with a pained expression, after this battle, the Jiang clan's vitality has been greatly damaged. Looking at this devastated Daiyu Island, this old man's heart aches even more. All the sins were caused by this old man. This old man only hopes that this decision is not wrong, otherwise, when this old man goes to the netherworld in the future, how can I face the ancestors of the Jiang clan? I, Jiang Yan, am the sinner of the Jiang clan. Jiang Yan was filled with grief and indignation. In a moment of agitation, 2 streams of turbid tears fell from the old man's eyes. Looking at his bloodshot eyes, even Qin Shi, an outsider, could not bear to see it, let alone these reborn juniors of the Jiang clan. Elder ancestor, you're right. Your decision is also for the sake of revitalizing the Jiang clan, and also for the sake of establishing the supreme glory of our clan in the future. The Jiang clan has not been defeated. As long as we are still alive, even if we are smashed to pieces, we will fight for a brand new future for the Jiang clan under your leadership. For the Jiang clan. Yes. Even if we are smashed to pieces, we will not retreat even half a step. F***ck the Divine General of Tiandu. In the future, if anyone dares to mention the word ascension in front of me, I will definitely not forgive him. From today onwards, the Jiang clan will definitely be at odds with Tiandu. Irreconcilable. Irreconcilable. When everyone saw Jiang Yan cry, the depression in their hearts immediately turned into endless grief and indignation. Suddenly, their morale was even higher than before. Chen Shi stared dumbfoundedly at the scene in front of him. Everyone surrounded Jiang Yan and made bold statements. Jiang Yan, on the other hand, occupied Jiang Fengyan's young body. His face revealed an expression of great comfort. The more he looked at it, the more awkward he felt. Therefore, Chen Shi couldn't help but sigh with emotion in his heart. This old fellow was really ruthless. He actually managed to win back the hearts of the people with just a few words. Although he didn't know the real purpose of Jiang Yan, Chen Shi was now convinced by this old fellow from the bottom of his heart. No matter what Jiang Yan did, at least, he dared to raise the flag and become enemies with Tiandu, right? After Jiang Yan's post-battle speech, the fighting spirit of the Jiang clan was reignited. Chen Shi was an outsider. Now that the crisis had been resolved, the Jiang clan was busy cleaning up the battlefield and rebuilding their home. He naturally couldn't stay here and be an eyesore, so he left silently. Before leaving, he also took the initiative to leave a restriction on Qixia Peak to prevent similar incidents from happening again. In fact, Chen Shi also felt a little regretful in his heart. After all, there was an old saying, if you cut the grass without removing the roots, it will grow again when the spring breeze blows. Today, he couldn't stop Wushu. Who knew what would happen in the future? In fact, with Wushu's shiny equipment, Chen Shi absolutely didn't believe that he didn't have any life-saving skills. Did he really think that Wushu was a wild chicken on the roadside that could be killed at will? Therefore, Chen Shi could only make up his mind now. If he could meet Wushu again next time, even if he used underhanded tricks, he must suppress him. Today's situation must not happen again. Chen Shi recalled what he saw today while flying back to Shangjing. It was almost time. It was time to pick up Ninian from school. At the same time, far in the northernmost part of the earth, a figure suddenly appeared on an iceberg floating on the sea. It was Wushu. After successfully escaping from Daiyu Island, Wushu flew all the way here in one breath. If it wasn't for the fact that he used up so much energy, he would have directly flown to the moon. This place was already remote enough. Wushu looked around. After confirming that there was no one here, he heaved a sigh of relief and sat cross-legged on the iceberg. As soon as he sat down, Wushu felt a burst of tightness in his chest. He didn't even have time to take out a pill from his summer mustard seed bag before coughing out a mouthful of blood. The blood splattered on the pure white iceberg. It was particularly dazzling. It was obvious that he had suffered a very serious internal injury. However, this injury wasn't caused by Chen Shi. It was caused by himself. Many animals would choose to use self-mutilation to escape when their lives were in danger. For example, geckos would cut off their tails, spiders would cut off their legs, sea cucumbers would spit out their organs, and so on. The reason why Wushu was able to escape from Chen Shi's eyes was because he used a method similar to this principle. That was blood escape. Using the blood escape would consume one's own essence blood. How important was essence blood to immortal cultivators? Wushu would never use it unless he had no other choice. He was forced into a corner by Chen Shi. However, no matter what, it was better to be injured than to die, right? At the thought of this, Wushu chuckled. He could not help but reveal a smug expression on his face. Baihong and Shui Xiang didn't know how to use this secret technique. He was the only one who knew how to use it. Mr. Chen, right? I'll remember you. You'll let me have 3 moves first, right? Just you wait. Next time, I'll let 300 divine generals attack you once, and then I'll let you have 3 moves first. I'll keep my word. Wushu looked up at the sky and threatened. However, he was so excited that he spat out another mouthful of blood. Do you think everything will be fine just because you've blocked the divine gate? He. At this moment, Wushu had reverted back to his crazy self. He was severely injured, but instead of healing himself, he sat on the iceberg and muttered to himself. Master once said, the soul mirror will be unsealed within 10 years. Let me calculate the time. 1 year in heaven, 8 years on earth. If that's the case, doesn't that mean I'll have to stay in the lower realm for a full year? Wait, doesn't that mean I'll lose 10 years of my life for nothing? No wonder no one wants to come to the lower realm. Yu Huan Tianzuan, oh Yu Huan Tianzuan, I'm going to lose big this time. You'll have to make it up to me when the time comes. Chapter 386. November 1st, Halloween in the West. Although many kindergartens were celebrating the Western Festival now, Donghua Gate Kindergarten did not promote the Western Festival in the park due to its pure bloodline. Therefore, for the children in the park, today was just a very ordinary day. The only thing worth noting was probably the temperature today. Because, winter had arrived in Shangjing again. This year's winter was slightly later than last year, but as soon as November passed, the trees on both sides of the street shed their leaves one after another. They held up the graceful branches of the dead trees as if they were welcoming the coming winter. The cold wind blew through the corner of the street and rolled up some leaves that had not been cleared. Perhaps because the kindergarten was next to the Forbidden City, it was particularly quiet here. In the alley, pedestrians hurriedly walked by in 2s and 3s, as if they did not want to stay in the cold wind for a moment longer. The road outside the kindergarten was already filled with cars that came to pick up children from school. The parents sat in the cars to keep warm, and the cars breathed out heavy air. Only she stood alone in front of the gate. He was wearing a black windbreaker, and he was standing like a javelin. At first glance, she looked a bit like a security guard in front of the sales department. Ding 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 as the pleasant bell rang, the park that had been asleep for a long time became lively again. The children were chattering about going home, and the teacher had to let them line up. Then, class by class, they came to the gate to look for their parents. Shi's side suddenly became lively. The parents scrambled to the side of the gate, wishing that they could immediately pull their children out from behind the iron gate. She was not in a hurry, and Ninian was not in a hurry either. This was because as soon as she walked out of the classroom, she saw Shi's figure as usual. Shi's figure, like a lighthouse on the sea, even if life was like waves and tides, he would always wait there firmly, silently waiting for Ninian to appear. Dad! 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 Ninian stood on the steps, excitedly waving her small hands at Shi. The two brothers followed behind her, one on her left and one on her right. They looked like two incomparably loyal little guardians. The children of the older class had to walk last, so after most of the children had left with their parents, the three little fellows ran out of the school gate under the guidance of the teacher. As soon as she crossed the iron gate, she didn't even have time to hug her before the little girl very sensibly turned around and said to the teacher with a grin, "Goodbye, teacher." "Bye, Ninian, Wen, Mingming, see you tomorrow, good. See you tomorrow." Unknowingly, the two brothers had developed the habit of not wanting to go to school if they didn't see Ninian. So now, the three children were all picked up by Shi. Gulao only needed to wait in the tea house. It was not that he was discriminating against ordinary kindergartens. It was just that the threshold for kindergarten teachers was too low. Naturally, there were good and bad teachers. Therefore, it was difficult for ordinary kindergarten's teachers to be as meticulous and patient as Donghua Gate Kindergarten. And this was the so-called professionalism. Under the patient guidance of the teachers, in addition to changing her accent, Ninian's wild nature, which had been spoiled by Shi and his wife, gradually began to be restrained. In the beginning, under the guidance of Aunt Zhang, Ninian was like a little girl in the mountains. At a young age, she knew that she had to share the burden of the family and never cause trouble for Aunt Zhang. Later, Shi and his wife came back, and the family of three was finally reunited. Ninian also became a small-town girl born in a rich family. Just like the song said, "You only know how to look at the stars in the sky foolishly. You are so pure. The return of her parents allowed her to find the greatest happiness in the world. Carefree and free. But it was also because of Chen Shi's fatherly attitude of holding her in his hands and fearing that she would fall and melt in his mouth that Nian gradually let go of the nature of a child. She learned to be coquettish, naughty, shameless, and throw a tantrum. But it was also at this time that only then could he be considered a complete child. Later, Nian went to kindergarten, and it was a model kindergarten that was ranked in the country. Under the patient guidance of the teachers, Nian changed again. And at this moment, she truly became a lady from a wealthy family. However, there were too few people in this wealthy family. At most, it was a family of 3, plus his father-in-law and sister-in-law's family, of course, whether it was a mountain girl, a small town girl, or a lady from a wealthy family. To Chen Shi, Nian would always be the smart, sensible, lively, and cute Nian. He only wanted Nian to grow up happily. Carefree, free, and unrestrained. No worries in the world should appear in Nian's young heart. In fact, Chen Shi really wanted to tell her sometimes, no matter what happens in the future, even if the sky falls down, Nian, don't be afraid, don't be sad, and don't be sad. That's because I'll take care of you. Dad. The teacher gave us a little red flower today. Why? Because we're good at drawing. Oh. What about the painting? On the wall behind the classroom. The teacher said that at the next parent-teacher meeting, she will show our painting to you. Nian was wearing a pink down jacket today and a rabbit ear hat on her head. Coupled with her rosy cheeks, she looked extremely adorable. She sat in Chen Shi's arms, and when she was excited, her little body couldn't help but gently twist. When Chen Shi patted her back in motion for her to sit down, she would immediately obediently hug Chen Shi's neck, and then coquettishly rub her head against Chen Shi's head. The father and daughter whispered, and the brothers obediently followed behind them. In fact, the two of them had long been accustomed to this kind of life, so they didn't feel neglected. The two brothers were only a few months older than Nian, but under Gu Lao's constant education, the idea of giving in to your sister in everything was thoroughly planted in the depths of their hearts. Even the most common things in daily life, such as playing on the slide, the two brothers would let Nian play first, and then it would be their turn. This kind of feeling was also in line with the mood described by Li Bai in The Long Journey, riding a bamboo horse, circling the bed to play with green plums. Living together for thousands of miles, the two young people have no quarrel. Childhood sweethearts, childhood sweethearts. It was important to mention that childhood sweethearts had nothing to do with love, but it referred to the most innocent and pure friendship in the world. Children were still young, so naturally, it was impossible to speculate with adult thinking. But no matter what, humans were always social animals, and childhood without companions was incomplete. With the company of the two brothers, Nian's childhood would only be more fulfilling and happy. As for the future, that would be discussed in the future. Chapter 387. Now that the matters on Daiyu Island were settled, Chen Shi's life returned to normal. The life of an ordinary person, naturally, it was dull and repetitive. Nian spent most of her time in kindergarten, so the tea house was fully taken care of by Qiao Yuan. Qiao Yuan graduated from the best university in Huaxia, so a small tea house was not a problem for her. College students nowadays were very smart. Perhaps it was because Qiao Yuan had been living with Chen Shi's family for a long time, so under the influence of Chen Shi's family, Qiao Yuan looked more mature. She was very smart and knew what to listen to and what not to listen to. She also knew what to ask and what not to ask. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps. In Qiao Yuan's eyes, Chen Shi's family was a hidden expert. Therefore, she did not know when it started, but there was a slight change in her thinking. In the past, Qiao Yuan was just an ordinary college student who had gone astray. She did not have any plans for the future. She always felt that after she graduated, she would find a suitable job according to her major. But now, Qiao Yuan did not want to live the rest of her life like this. Although Chen Shi's family was always thinking about where to go and play, they did not set a good example for her at all. But under her rich imagination, she was able to completely fill in the background of Chen Shi and her husband. The boss and lady boss, they were the modern version of Yang Gua and Xiao Longnu. They had seen the prosperity of the world, crossed thousands of mountains and rivers, but in the end, they resolutely chose to retreat from the turbulence and live a seemingly ordinary, but happy and stable life with their loved ones. This was Qiao Yuan's dream, and also her role model in life. It was just that Chen Shi's family had reached the end, while she had just started. Qiao Yuan was in her 4th year of university this year, and her mind was gradually becoming more active. In fact, not to mention Chen Shi's family, even the retired old man Gu Lao was not simple. Although the two brothers looked like losers all day long, in fact, the moment they were born, they were already rich second-generation heirs. After all, the two of them had a courtyard house in Ho-Hai. It was very valuable. The little girl's mind was active, and she didn't know what Chen Shi was busy with recently, so the responsibility of playing chess and chatting with Gu Lao naturally fell on her shoulders. Needless to say, this old man and young man actually got along quite well. Although Gu Lao didn't specifically teach Qiao Yuan anything, this little girl would always inadvertently learn things that couldn't be learned in school. Qiao Yuan was accumulating herself, just like the sweeping monks in the scripture depository. When she decided to leave the small tea house, it was time for her to set sail and usher in her brilliant life. Day after day, the cycle repeated itself. Like a sponge, Qiao Yuan studied and improved herself crazily, while Gu Lao enjoyed the rest of his life. Qin Ruoying was in closed-door cultivation all day long, and Chen Shi rarely showed up except to take the 3 children to and from school. Because, Chen Shi was busy with something important. A very, very big thing. For this, after Chen Shi sent Ninian to school every day, he had to cross the entire Pacific Ocean and go to the United States, which was far away on the other side of the ocean. Of course, Chen Shi didn't go to the United States for fun, but for work. The Adumbra flower was so precious, naturally, it couldn't be refined with an ordinary iron basin. And Chen Shi didn't have enough materials to refine a new alchemy furnace, so refining the Adumbra flower became a big problem. So after thinking about it, Chen Shi finally decided to use the power of nature to refine the elixir. That was, heaven and earth as the furnace, nature as the work, yin and yang as the charcoal, all things as the copper. Therefore, the supervolcano in Yellowstone Park was his first choice. The so-called supervolcano was a large-scale eruption volcano that could change the world's weather after eruption and even threaten human beings. Yellowstone Park was once the world's largest national park, and Yellowstone Volcano was the world's largest supervolcano. Mount Fuji was an active volcano, but it wasn't a supervolcano, so it didn't have the qualifications to enter Chen Shi's consideration. Refining elixir was a very complicated thing. The energy cultivation elixir that he refined in the past was actually rubbish, so Chen Shi didn't care at all. Now that he finally had the best ingredients, Chen Shi naturally had to pay 120% attention. Configuring the prescription, screening the ingredients, analyzing the medicinal properties, choosing the furnace, and so on. After doing all this preliminary work, Chen Shi could officially start refining the elixir. This day, December 1st, Shangjing had just welcomed the first snow, but Yellowstone Park was already covered in snow. Looking around, the dense pine forests rose and fell, and the rolling mountains were covered in morning fog. Animal footprints crisscrossed the snowy plains, and hot springs rose and fell one after another. Because the world's largest supervolcano was buried below, Yellowstone Park had a wonderful scenery that was difficult to see in other places during winter. When the warm water vapor sprayed into the cold air, the water molecules would instantly solidify into a rain of small ice pellets, forming an extremely rare geothermal fountain. So what kind of park was this? It was simply a paradise on Earth. Yellowstone Park covered an area of up to 9,000 square kilometers, 1/3 larger than Zhonghai's 6,000 square kilometers. Because of the need to close off the mountains to cultivate forests, the park would be completely closed at the end of October and would only reopen in mid-December. During this time, only a few scenic spots could be visited. Therefore, when Chen Shi arrived at the park, there was not a single tourist in the huge park. This was not the first time he had been here. After the volcanic eruption cooled down, it would produce hard and impermeable basalt. After rainfall, it would generally produce a large lake. Therefore, the crater of Yellowstone Park was not protruding like Mount Fuji, but hidden under Yellowstone Lake. It could even be said that the entire Yellowstone Park was located on the crater of the volcano. Shi plunged into Yellowstone Lake, then followed the tunnel he had previously dug and quickly flew underground. The reason why it was called a supervolcano was because there was a magma reservoir with a diameter of 70 kilometers and a thickness of about 10 kilometers below the crater. In fact, a volcano was like a pressure cooker. Once the internal temperature rose to a certain level, the magma inside would instantly erupt. Shi set up a restriction in the magma reservoir. Then, he put all the medicinal herbs he had collected during this period of time inside, such as the adumbra flower, bloodthorn grass, ginseng flowers, and all kinds of precious medicinal herbs that could be found in the world. Rare and precious treasures were produced from the earth. With the calcination and extraction of the underground fire essence, coupled with the continuous washing of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, the medicinal properties of the medicinal herbs could be released most effectively. Shi used the restriction to bind the medicinal properties and continuously quenched and compressed them together. The released medicinal properties would gradually change from a gaseous state to a liquid state, and finally to a solid state. When the medicinal herbs were exhausted, it was time for the elixir to be produced. What was the most important thing in alchemy? It was neither the medicinal herbs nor the technique. It was the last step before the elixir was formed. Because this was not an ordinary Chinese medicine, the moment the elixir was produced, it was like forcibly opening the lid of the pressure cooker. Boiling hot steam would instantly rush out. What Shi had to do was to smoothly take the elixir out of the furnace from this boiling hot steam. It sounded very simple. But what if the steam was replaced with the spirit energy of heaven and earth? The adumbra flower's grade was very high, and the elixir it produced was at least a 9th grade elixir. Thus, the accumulation of more than 3,000 years would completely erupt the moment the furnace was opened, along with the elixir. If Shi did not immediately take the elixir and use a secret technique to bind the elixir, then the medicinal properties of the elixir would rapidly dissipate, turning back into spirit energy and dissipating into heaven and earth. And precisely because of this, when cultivators refined high-grade elixirs, they would usually use a high-grade alchemy furnace. On one hand, it was to extract the medicinal properties more effectively. On the other hand, it was for safety reasons, using the alchemy furnace to resist the impact of the elixir when it was produced. Shi did not have an alchemy furnace, so he could only do it himself. This was a battle. It was a battle between Shi and the elixir. If he could not successfully take the elixir from the sudden explosion of spirit energy, if it was light, the elixir would be destroyed, and if it was heavy. Chapter 388. The interior of the volcano might be different from what many people imagined. It was hollow, like an iron box, and it was filled with boiling magma. The so-called magma was actually a silicate substance that had melted into a molten state due to high temperature. It would show different colors according to the temperature. The higher the temperature, the lighter the color. Under the illumination of the flames, the magma reservoir buried under Yellowstone Park was a colorful underground world. In addition to the red magma, the magma reservoir was mainly red and yellow. The yellow was sulfur, and the red was iron. In addition, there was a black substance at the top of the magma reservoir. This black substance was the surface of the rock formed by the cooling of the gas. Yellowstone Park's supervolcano would erupt once every 600,000 years. The last time was about 630,000 years ago. Therefore, this supervolcano had entered the eruption cycle and could erupt at any time. Scientists had used computers to simulate the eruption. Once the supervolcano in Yellowstone Park erupted, 90% of the people within 1,000 kilometers would not be spared. Most of them would die from inhaling the volcanic ash, which would cause their lungs to solidify. In other words, most of the United States would become a land of death. There was no chance of survival. After the eruption, the volcanic ash that was spewed out by the magma would drift to every corner of the earth within 2 days. Then, the nuclear winter would arrive. The thick volcanic ash would cover most of the world. Sunlight would not be able to reach the earth. A large number of animals and plants would begin to die, and black acid rain would cover the entire world. This process would last for at least 3 to 6 months. In other words, once the supervolcano erupted, not only would the United States suffer, but the entire world would fall into a food crisis. The disaster movie, 2012, had already shown this point. After all, Chen Shi was not a geologist. Therefore, when he chose the location of the pill refinement, he only focused on finding the largest volcano and did not consider other problems at all. The refinement of the pill had reached the final stage. Chen Shi floated at the top of the magma reservoir. The ball of light directly below him was the heaven and earth furnace that he had set up. In addition, he had even set up a spirit gathering formation here. With Yellowstone Park as the center, all the spirit energy within 100 miles flowed into it, so that the entire magma reservoir was filled with rich spirit energy of heaven and earth. It was like a balloon that had been stretched to its limit, and could explode at any time. Lava surged and earth fire raged. Heaven and earth were the furnace, and spiritual energy was the charcoal. Under the continuous burning of the earth fire, the medicinal properties of the Adumbra flower were completely unleashed. Once the spirit pill was formed, the restriction would fall apart, and the compressed spirit chi of heaven and earth would explode in an instant. Its intensity would not be inferior to a large-scale spirit chi tide. In fact, it was even more ferocious and surging than the tide of spiritual energy. At the same time, it was also more threatening. Chen Shi waited patiently, focusing all his attention on the ball of light. Suddenly, a slight cracking sound came from the top of the magma chamber. Crack. It was a very weak sound. Before Chen Shi could react, the faint cracking noise had turned into a series of loud rumbling noises. The earth seemed to be torn apart. Immediately afterward, the volcanic passage that had been deposited for hundreds of thousands of years came alive again. The strong air pressure continued to rise, trying to find a way to vent. The mountain could not withstand the pressure, and huge cracks began to appear, spreading all the way to the surface at an extremely fast speed. The cracks grew bigger and more numerous. Countless huge rocks continued to fall from above. The moment the huge rocks smashed into the magma below, the magma boiled, and sparks flew everywhere. Chen Shi was stunned. Until this moment, he didn't even realize what a terrible thing he was doing. The earth began to tremble. Under the pressure, countless cracks appeared on the inside of the mountain. The cracks reached the surface. In an instant, countless geothermal fountains erupted from Yellowstone Park at the same time. Because the temperature was too high, the snow on the surface began to sublimate, turning from a solid to a gas in an instant. A thick fog shrouded the park. At the same time, earthquake alarms sounded in several cities around Yellowstone Park. The tremors grew stronger and stronger. This was not an earthquake, but the supervolcano had begun to become active. Under the pressure, the weak surface of the earth began to bulge, undulating strangely like waves. Birds cried out, and beasts howled. Countless animals ran out of the park, and flocks of birds flew across the sky, blotting out the sun. The only thing worth celebrating was, it was probably because Yellowstone Park was not open to tourists during this period of time. This place was freezing cold. Other than a few park staff, there were not many people. Chen Shi was inside the magma chamber, so he could see more clearly. He saw the mountain collapse. He also saw the magma boiling. Originally, he came to pick up the medicine happily, but he did not expect to witness a volcanic eruption with his own eyes. Chen Shi finally realized the seriousness of the matter. But just as he was about to find a way to contain the volcanic eruption, the elixir came out of the furnace without warning. The sudden burst of spiritual energy forced him to take a few steps back. Seeing this, Chen Shi could not help but let out a long howl, and immediately rushed toward the ball of light. It was not easy to wait for the elixir to come out of the furnace. If he really failed at this time, wouldn't he be depressed to death? The spiritual energy turned into gusts of wind, like sharp blades, constantly slapping Chen Shi's body. Even if his cultivation was unparalleled, at this moment, he could only barely withstand the pressure, and then slowly approached the elixir. The elixir was quietly suspended in the middle of the cave. It was like a luminous pearl, shining brightly. After such a long time of extraction, the medicinal properties were fully displayed. As soon as it came out, the magma chamber was filled with a refreshing smell. Just taking a deep breath of the aroma would make one feel refreshed and refreshed. The elixir was right in front of him. Thinking of the efficacy of this elixir, even Chen-Shi could not help but feel a little excited. As long as he took this elixir, then Ying would step into the diviner realm and condense the golden elixir. In a moment of excitement, Chen-Shi also used all his strength, and a burst of true essence energy instantly erupted from his body, not inferior to the spiritual energy tide. The energy was like a sharp knife, leading Chen-Shi all the way to the elixir. However, with every step he took, a layer of true essence in his body would be consumed. Finally, Chen-Shi flew near the elixir. The moment his fingers touched the elixir, the surging spiritual energy in the magma chamber seemed to have heard the call, and all of it converged into the elixir. The pressure suddenly disappeared. However, before Chen-Shi had time to be happy, the boiling magma below was like a fountain, and it suddenly spewed up into the sky. Why did the volcano not erupt? That was because the spiritual energy of heaven and earth filled the cave, and thus the magma was firmly pressed in the magma chamber. Once Chen-Shi took the elixir, the magma that had lost its suppression would be like a dam bursting, and it would spray out more fiercely and violently than before. This was an explosive volcanic eruption. From afar, it looked like a super-nuclear bomb had been dropped in Yellowstone Park. First, a burst of strong light lit up the sky. Immediately after, a gigantic mushroom cloud slowly rose. At the same time as the mushroom cloud rose, there were countless bolts of lightning shuttling back and forth. The angry volcano spewed magma and thick smoke, and ferocious electric snakes hissed in the air. This was not a movie, but a joint performance of the sky and the earth, volcanic lightning. Chapter 389. The supervolcano erupted. At that moment, the entire world seemed to have quieted down. The crater of the volcano was like a lit-up firework. First, it emitted a cloud of smoke that covered the sky, then it suddenly exploded into the sky. In an instant, a mushroom cloud formed by volcanic ash and steam rose into the sky, almost breaking through the clouds. Dark red magma spewed out along with the billowing black smoke. The red-hot rocks were pushed into the sky and exploded like fireworks, then fell in all directions. From afar, it looked like thousands of meteors had passed by, leaving streaks of fiery red marks in the sky. At the same time, the shock waves that accompanied the explosion spread out wave after wave. Countless boulders were blown away by the strong wind, and countless trees were uprooted. The accumulated snow on the ground turned into white smoke and drifted in all directions. At that moment, all living things cried out, and the plants bowed their heads. Because sound traveled the slowest, after the shock waves exploded, the loud rumbling sound began to spread out in all directions. The entire earth was shaking violently. Magma spewed out from the crater of the volcano, black smoke filled the sky, and hot flames swallowed a large area of land. This was the anger of nature. All living things were destined to be doomed, and could only helplessly fall into this terrible disaster. This scene, it must be the so-called, the birth of a drought demon. Thousands of miles of land were barren. Starving people were everywhere, and not even a blade of grass grew. Chen-Shi turned into a golden light and flew out of the thick smoke. When he saw the scene in front of him, he finally realized what he had done. The huge Yellowstone Park had become a purgatory. Magma spewed out from the crater of the volcano, spreading out wave after wave. Magma spread all over the ground, like a bright red wound, and blood was gushing out. This was definitely an accident. Chen-Shi looked at the scene in front of him, dumbfounded. After he came back to his senses, he began to think about how to remedy the situation. After all, he was not a patriot. Although the United States was annoying, the people of the United States were innocent. Chen-Shi's worldview was not so twisted and dark. How to remedy it? This was really a problem. Volcanic eruptions were not short-lived, but rather a continuous process. Once this hole was opened, magma would continuously gush out from the ground. This would last for at least a few hours, at most a few days, or even a few years. Rain could not extinguish a volcano. This was because volcanoes were not only found on land. There were also volcanoes under the sea. Even the sea could not extinguish a volcano, let alone a few heavy rains. She looked at the crater with a worried expression. After thinking for a long time, he finally came up with the simplest and most violent method, and that was, he directly blocked the volcanic crater. Just like the pressure cooker, wouldn't the problem be solved once the lid was put back on? This restriction didn't even need to be too exquisite. It just needed to be hard and strong enough to withstand the pressure from the magma reservoir. Thinking of this, Shi immediately began to work hard to arrange. As long as they acted quickly, they might be able to save many lives before the magma spread to the nearby cities. While Shi was busy cleaning up the mess, Karakoram. This was a place Shi was very familiar with. However, this place hid many secrets that no one knew about. It was cold here. Other than the snowy mountains that had not melted for thousands of years, there was only the blue sky and white clouds. There were many mountains here. After climbing over a tall mountain, one would see countless tall mountains. Above the white snow, in the middle of the vast mountain range, there was a seemingly ordinary 10,000-year-old snow mountain. It was not high enough, nor was it dangerous enough. In addition to this remote terrain, it did not even have a widely spread name. It was just the most inconspicuous mountain among the vast mountains. However, 10,000 years ago, it also had a very beautiful name, which was Floating Mist Mountain. The green grass could be waves, and the blue sea could be dust. The green hills could be turned into a flowing ocean, and the sea could also be turned into the land where dust had settled. Tens of thousands of years had passed. The glory of Floating Mist Mountain had turned to dust with time. The current Floating Mist Mountain was probably just a barren snowy mountain. But today, however, this barren snowy mountain welcomed an uninvited guest. Jiang Yan. In fact, since the moment Wushu attacked Daiyu Island, there was no such person as Jiang Fengyan in this world. A 20-year-old body and a 1,000-year-old soul. After a month of recuperation, Jiang Yan had completely adapted to this body, so with every movement he made, his body naturally exuded a weather-beaten feeling. Jiang Yan stepped on the snow and walked slowly. Step by step. It was like an ant walking on a painting. Although it was small, it was very obvious. It seemed that this was not the first time Jiang Yan had come here. But perhaps because it had been too long, he would stop and look around after a few steps to make sure that he did not take the wrong path. He did not fly, but walked slowly on the snow. But as he walked, Jiang Yan's figure actually disappeared into thin air just like that. Because, he walked into a formation. The instant he stepped into the array formation, a passageway appeared before Jiang Yan's eyes. Jiang Yan did not even hesitate and walked straight into the tunnel. There was no light source in the tunnel, it was pitch black. But Jiang Yan had no intention of lighting a light at all. He continued to walk forward without stopping. He did not know how far he had walked before a faint light appeared at the end of the tunnel. Seeing this, a faint smile immediately appeared on Jiang Yan's face. At the end of the tunnel was a hall. There was only a faint green light source inside. From afar, it looked like a will-o'-the-wisp. It wandered in the hall while emitting a dim light. The moment Jiang Yan stepped into the hall, an old voice sounded in the hall. Who's here? It's me, Jiang Yan. The young man's voice was good. The energetic voice suddenly formed a sharp contrast with the lifeless voice. And as soon as Jiang Yan's voice fell, the hall that had been silent for a long time seemed to come alive again. Jiang Yan? Jiang Yan? Jiang Yan. Countless different voices sounded in every corner of the hall. Just like the many spectators sitting around, the moment they saw Jiang Yan appear, they cheered in unison. But these voices sounded like the voices of dried corpses. It was dry and shriveled, and at the same time, it was a bit harsh and hoarse. Jiang Yen seemed to enjoy the feeling of being the center of attention. After a while, he raised his arms and signaled for everyone to be quiet. The cheers stopped abruptly. At this time, Jiang Yen faced the center of the hall and said slowly, "I'm sure you all know what's going on outside, so now I just want to ask, the oath back then, is it still valid now?" After that, Jiang Yen began to look around. But no one answered him. The entire hall was silent. It was quiet and empty. It was as if he was the only living person in the room. Jiang Yen stood in the center of the hall and waited silently. After a long while, the old voice sounded again. "How can the oath of the 9 serenities be taken lightly? Since you have decided to come out, we will not continue to endure here. Go ahead and make the arrangements. If there is no doubt, I am willing to respect Jiang Yen as the co-leader of the 9 serenities and lead us to fight against Tiandu. Do you have any objections?" As soon as this question was asked, there was a sound of agreement in the hall. Seconded. 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 Just like the company's board of directors, Jiang Yen was officially elected as the new CEO of the 9 serenities. There were 9 levels of heaven and 9 levels of earth. There was Tiandu above and the 9 serenities below. The 2 words, 9 serenities, were the fundamental reason why Jiang Yen dared to go against Tiandu. For this, he was even willing to sacrifice the entire Jiang family and offer up all the remaining celestials on Daiyu Island for the 9 serenities to take. Because what he wanted. Chapter 390. After Qin busied himself for half a day, the mess in Yellowstone Park was finally cleaned up. For this reason, he specially set up a super-large restriction to completely seal the magma reservoir. In fact, this could be regarded as a blessing in disguise. After Qin's messing around, part of the pressure on the Yellowstone Park supervolcano had been removed. Coupled with the effect of the restriction, the next natural eruption of this volcano was estimated to be tens of thousands of years later. If the United States knew the truth of this matter, they would probably only be grateful to Qin and would worship him as their ancestor. It was just a short eruption. Although the scale was large, the destructive power was always limited. The only thing that was painful to lose was probably the beautiful natural scenery of Yellowstone Park. Even if they immediately began to rebuild it, it would take many years to form an ecological chain of today's scale. Of course, these losses were not for Qin to worry about. He had done what he could and made up for what he could. Therefore, after carefully checking the restriction, Qin happily took the spirit pill and embarked on the return journey. Perhaps because he was in a good mood, during the flight to Huaxia, he took out the spirit pill from time to time to observe it. Just a whiff of this fragrant scent was enough to make one intoxicated. Although the grade of this spirit pill was not as high as he imagined, it could barely reach the 6th or 7th grade. After all, the supplementary ingredients were just some ordinary medicinal materials. It was already very good to be able to reach this standard. And with the current conditions on Earth, how could Qin not be satisfied with the fact that such a high-grade spirit pill could be refined? Humans should always be content with what they have. Refining pills was a craft, and it could not be done without some experience. Refining pills according to a recipe was something that only a worker would do. With Qin's years of experience, coupled with his understanding of medicinal materials and pharmacology, he could naturally configure a prescription that was really suitable for the current situation based on the existing materials. Therefore, this spirit pill was absolutely unique. It didn't even have a name. Even if one searched the entire Heavenly Jade domain, they wouldn't be able to find a second one. Naturally, the naming rights fell to Qin. However, he didn't have any fancy ideas at all. He didn't even bother to come up with a name. He directly began to think about how to divide up the spirit pills. There was only one spirit pill, but it could be divided into several portions. He cut it in half and gave the other half to Yingying. The remaining half would be divided into 3 parts, one for him and one for Ninian. Then, the last portion would be cut in half. One half would be given to his father-in-law and the other half would be given to Madame Jiang. His sister-in-law had already eaten the heaven and earth treasure before, so she had indigestion. Therefore, Chen Shi directly ignored Qin Shueqing this time. As for Big Cat and Big Head, their cultivation levels were too low, so it was enough for them to eat some energy cultivation pills. Thinking of this, a name suddenly popped up in Chen Shi's mind. Lin Xian. After such a long time, Lin Xian should have stepped into the middle stage of the qi refinement realm, right? Should he cut Madame Jiang's portion in half and give half to her? Chen Shi seriously thought about this problem. As he thought about it, he unknowingly returned to Shangjing. During this period of time, as long as he sent Nian to school, Chen Shi would immediately go home to accompany Qin Ruoying to cultivate. Since he was already out today, why not go to school and see how Nian's class looked like? Therefore, Chen Shi immediately turned around and flew toward Donghua Gate Kindergarten. Nian's class today was really interesting. It was a theme class. The content of the theme was, My Mom and Dad. This was the most common class in kindergartens. It was mainly to guide children to understand themselves and others correctly, to develop a close and cooperative attitude toward others and society, and to learn the preliminary interpersonal skills. Since the correct child wanted to get to know others, the first thing to do was to start with the people around the child, which was their parents. That was why today's class was held. Previously, the teacher had already taught the children how to draw a family portrait, so today they picked up their own painting and introduced their family members to everyone in turn. The content of the class was actually quite simple. It was nothing more than the teacher asking questions, and the children standing up to answer. Of course, the questions were also very simple. For example, who is the person in the painting? What does it have to do with you? Is it good for you? What do they like to do the most? The children stood up one by one to answer. Chen Shi hid outside the classroom and listened to every word with great interest. Finally, it was Nian's turn to stand up. The little girl did not have stage fright at all. She pointed at the person in the painting and answered the teacher's questions generously. When the teacher asked her, What does Dad like to do the most? The little thing opened its mouth and replied, Daddy loves to cook the most. Dad's cooking is delicious. I like Dad's cooking. Then do you like Dad's cooking more? Or do you like Dad more? After the teacher threw out a question that she hadn't asked before, the little girl was stunned on the spot. She didn't seem to expect the teacher to ask such a question at all. So after hesitating for a moment, the little girl frowned and whispered softly, I like both. Dad's cooking is delicious. I like Dad. The moment he heard this sentence, the expression on Chen Shi's face was very rich. So if your father doesn't know how to cook, you won't like him? The little girl's answer wasn't wrong, but it wasn't perfect. After the teacher's guidance, she finally realized the importance of her father, so she quickly nodded and affirmed, even if Dad's cooking isn't good, I like Dad. Children's words carried no harm. It was actually quite interesting to listen to children talk when they had nothing to do. After the little girl sat down, it was the brothers' turn. Because they were twins, the two of them drew a picture together. The teacher asked questions as usual, but she didn't expect to make a mistake here, and that was, she didn't find out the child's family situation clearly. Therefore, when the teacher casually asked who was the father, the brothers exploded on the spot. We don't have a father. Old Gu didn't teach them this, and the old man wasn't so petty. In fact, it was Gu Yao who taught them this. Perhaps it was because she quarreled with Xia Kaiji when she was alive, so Gu Yao had been holding back her resentment after she died, so she would instill this idea in the brothers from time to time. Of course, they had to listen to what their mother said. So, they didn't have a father. When the brothers shouted this sentence in unison, the teacher knew that something bad had happened. Sure enough. As soon as the brothers finished speaking, the other children were surprised and started to talk about it. Teacher. Is he a wild child without a father? Mom told me before. If I'm taken away by bad people, then I'll lose my parents and can only become a wild child. Wild child. He's a wild child. Wild child. In recent years, the divorce rate had been increasing, and the impact of parents' divorce on children was definitely the most profound and heavy. This was a sensitive topic. Therefore, the kindergarten teacher paid attention to this issue, and even specifically investigated the family situation of each child before entering school. She didn't think much at that time, and directly said the names of Xia, Kaiji and Gu Yao. He never thought that the brothers wouldn't recognize this father at all. Chapter 391. Schools nowadays paid attention to humanized teaching. Whether it was kindergarten, primary school, or secondary school, a qualified teacher would always prevent the children from facing these problems directly. Of course, there were also many retarded teachers who would not care about these details at all. Knowing that there were children in the class who had lost their father at a young age, the teacher still assigned similar essay topics, such as, my father, I want to tell you, father's love, and so on. If this was not retarded, then what was? How should the children write? Should they rely on their imagination to make it up? In fact, this was not an essay at all, but a sharp knife inserted into the children's chests. The children were still so young. If they could enlighten and encourage themselves to successfully walk out of their psychological trauma, then all the child psychologists in the world could be fired. According to the education philosophy of Donghua Gate Kindergarten, this kind of situation was absolutely not allowed to happen. Once the principal found out, the teacher would immediately pack up and leave. Therefore, after hearing the brothers shout that they did not have a father, even the teacher was shocked. It was human nature to be exclusive. Most of the children in the class were either rich or respectable. They had lived in different circles since they were young, so naturally, they were more exclusive than ordinary children. Without a father, the brothers were the outliers in the eyes of this group of children. Outliers would always be excluded. When the children shouted, wild children, for the first time, the brothers were labeled as outliers on their foreheads. Regarding this problem, the brothers were very calm. The two of them stood upright in the middle of the classroom, and there was no intention of avoiding the gaze in their eyes. Because in their eyes, this was the truth. And the facts also proved that they only needed their mother and grandpa. Of course, the brothers did not have much of a reaction, mainly because they had not experienced what Nian had experienced. They had not been ridiculed and ostracized by children of the same age, so naturally, they did not understand that the words, no father, could not be said casually. The class suddenly became lively. Seeing this, the teacher could only quickly signal for everyone to be quiet. But at this moment, the little girl at the side suddenly flipped out. Don't talk nonsense. Nian stood up from her seat and then shouted at the class with righteous indignation, they are not wild children. The little girl was very angry. On one hand, it was because the two brothers were the closest to her. On the other hand, it was because she had a deeper understanding of the word wild child. She didn't like those three words, so naturally, she wouldn't allow others to say that about her little friend. Wenwen and Mingming's father is on a business trip. My father used to go on business trips too. He only returned after a very long time. That's why they called me a wild child. Let me tell you, I'm not a wild child. My father is back. He comes to school every day to bring me home. Wenwen and Mingming's father will come back too. I'm not a wild child. They are not wild children. We are not wild children. While speaking, the little guy suddenly burst into tears. After all, he was still a child. It was not easy for her to defend herself under such circumstances. After Nian's interruption, the teacher finally came back to his senses and immediately comforted her. Then, the teacher used Nian's words and began to guide the children in the class. Everyone's parents were not at home sometimes, so they couldn't be called wild children because of that, right? In order to prevent the two brothers from causing trouble again, the teacher didn't even dare to let them speak again. He directly let them sit back in their seats and play a little game with Nian. When Nian gradually stopped crying, the teacher decisively changed the theme of the day, and then led the children to sit on the small train outside the house. There were 3 teachers in a class. The main teacher made such a big mistake, so the teachers in the side class should report it to the principal. But considering that everyone was in the same boat, the teachers in the side class concealed this matter. The small disturbance soon subsided. Nyan little face showed a smile again, but the 2 brothers' faces showed a thoughtful expression. Perhaps from this moment on, the shadow of their father gradually emerged from the bottom of their hearts. She was like a bystander, silently watching the whole process. To be honest, when he saw Nyan stand up and passionately defend the 2 brothers, he, as a father, was really shocked. That feeling was hard to describe. In short, Nyan's performance today made him very satisfied. He didn't raise his daughter in vain. Dad will always love you. Forever and ever. Happy, she called the big cat who had been squatting on the wall pillar and dozing off. Then, he scraped a layer of skin from the elixir and threw it to the big cat. This guy was lying on the school wall every day, doing nothing but sleeping. Today, the leader happened to be inspecting, so he was happy and gave it such a big gift. It was really a blessing from the sky. The big cat happily jumped around Shi's feet like a dog. She was waiting for the little guy to finish school while thinking about the 2 brothers. He really had to find time to talk to old Gu. Regardless of the grudge between Xia Kaiji and Gu Yao, the child was innocent. How could he instill such thoughts in the child? This kind of thinking was unacceptable. She was seriously thinking about the child's education, but he didn't notice. He hadn't been in seclusion for a long time to seek a breakthrough. He clearly had an epiphany some time ago on Daiyu Island. Now, he only needed to concentrate on seclusion, and the day he came out would be the day he reached insightful emptiness. But even so, Shi still didn't plan to go into seclusion. Because he had to pick up Nyan from school every day, cook for Nyan, and play with Nyan, these trivial matters took up too much of his time, and made him live more and more like an ordinary person. The life of an ordinary person was trivial, nothing more than some household chores. He could even do nothing all day, just stay outside Nyan's classroom and watch his daughter grow up day by day. Actually, to put it bluntly, in his current state, he didn't deserve to be a cultivator at all. Cultivation didn't just fall from the sky, it had to be accumulated bit by bit. It was also because of this that Qin Shueching sometimes felt very strange. Did Shi really not need to cultivate? Nyan was very cute. But because of Nyan, did he really have to completely give up on cultivation? As a qualified martial arts fanatic, her sister-in-law really didn't understand Shi's approach, so she also talked to Shi. In this regard, Shi's attitude was more resolute than she imagined. Nyan was indeed more important than cultivation. If he had to choose between Nyan and cultivation, Shi would also choose the former without hesitation. You say it's trivial, but I say it's deep and meaningful. Probably only Shi himself could understand the meaning behind it. You're under too little pressure. This was the last sentence Qin Shueching said to Shi before she went into seclusion. Because in her opinion, Shi was simply a nouveau riche. Once he had a little money, he began to forget himself. He was busy taking the child around all day and didn't care about his own career at all. One had to know that his current stability came from his previous accumulation. Once these accumulations were exhausted, was he going to take the child and sell vegetables on the streets? This was the difference in values. Chapter 392. December 22nd, Winter Solstice. Although this year's winter came late, the snowfall was not much worse than last year's. Snow fell like goose feathers. After a night, a thick layer of snow piled up in the alley. The little guy had been talking about skating all day, but he did not know that the ice rink in Hohai would not open for another month. Everything was the same as usual. After the little guy cuddled with Shi as usual, he got up and went to school. Shi stayed behind the wall until he finished watching the little guy do his morning exercises. Then, he slowly strolled back to Dongming Alley like an ordinary person who got up early for a walk. But what was different from usual was, Shi met an acquaintance at the entrance of the alley today. Mr. Chen, long time no see. The person was Jiang Yan. Jiang Yan was wearing a long black down jacket and a gray wool hoodie on his head, hiding his long hair. Jiang Yan's current appearance, he looked no different from the young people you could see on the street. The only difference was that he still had an outstanding temperament that was as deep as the abyss. Why are you here? She never thought that Jiang Yan would come to Shangjing and even find him at his door. So the moment he saw Jiang Yan, he was a little surprised. Could it be that this old guy had been stuck in the soul crystal for too long and wanted to wander around after taking over his body? Actually, it's like this. After I took the elixir you gave me, I realized that this elixir was extraordinary. You must have added a lot of rare herbs in it, right? Jiang Yan laughed. After seeing Chen Shi extend his hand and make a please gesture, he immediately followed Chen Shi into the courtyard. The visitor was a guest, so he had to at least show some basic courtesy. So, Chen Shi led Jiang Yan to the main hall and made him a pot of tea. I did add a lot of things, but they are just some common herbs. The most important thing is your adumbra flower. After hearing Chen Shi's words, Jiang Yan immediately laughed and said, the Jiang family doesn't have such exquisite alchemy skills like yours. After your careful concoction, this adumbra flower really showed its medicinal effects. If that's the case, the Jiang family has really profited. Jiang Yan seemed very happy. Seeing this, Chen Shi laughed a few times. She was too lazy to be polite with him. As long as he was happy, it was fine. In fact, after Chen Shi thought that this elixir would definitely end up in Jiang's stomach, he cut the Jiang family's portion in half, and planned to leave the other half for Lin Xian. After all, he should not let the goodies. The old man had been hiding in the soul crystal for so many years, so he probably had accumulated a huge amount of vital energy. Thinking about it, this little bit was not too much, and this little bit was not too little. He just had to make do with it. To be honest, based on the amount that Jiang Yan had consumed, it was probably not as effective as directly swallowing the adumbra flower. Therefore, even if Chen Shi used her but to think, she knew that the old man must have other motives for coming to her door today. Alright, you don't have to be so polite with me. Chen Shi did not have the time to talk nonsense with him, so he asked directly, tell me, why did you come all the way here? Hearing this, the smile on Jiang Yan's face became even more cheerful. Actually, it's nothing much. I just wanted to come out for a walk and pay you a visit. At this point, Jiang Yan's gaze fell on the couplet in the middle of the main hall. The heavenly gate is broken, the river opens, the jade water flows east. However, his gaze did not linger for long, then he put on a rather emotional expression and sighed. White clouds for 1,000 years, the sky is long, look at this world, where does it look like it used to? When I came here, I even took that big guy called an airplane. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I definitely wouldn't believe it. Now, even mortals can ride the clouds and travel thousands of miles in a day. It's just like what the ancestors said, a day in the mountains is 1,000 years in the world. I think it's time for Daiyu Island to change its philosophy. The Jiang family can't always live in the past. We should try to integrate into the present. The old man was a chatterbox, and once he opened his mouth, he would not stop muttering. After listening for a while, Chen Shi felt a headache coming on, so he found an excuse to send him out. No wonder everyone said that the older a person was, the more long-winded they became. This old man had been holding it in for thousands of years. If he really let him continue, wouldn't he talk for 3 days and 3 nights? Alright, then I won't disturb you. Have a good rest, I'll go to the Great Wall again, Jiang Yan stood in the alley and waved goodbye to Chen Shi with a smile. After Chen Shi chuckled, he didn't even bother to exchange pleasantries, and directly closed the door. Bye-bye to you. Jiang Yan didn't feel offended at all. When he turned and walked out of the alley, there was even a faint smile on his face. After that, Jiang Yan strolled leisurely on the streets, looking around from time to time. He looked like a tourist who had just arrived in the city. However, just as Jiang Yan walked out of the main street, a figure suddenly appeared beside him. Jiang Yan glanced at him and said coldly, there are people coming and going here, can't you wait until there's no one before you appear? Hearing this, that person said indifferently, they're just a bunch of ants, so what if they see us? They'll only think that their eyes are playing tricks on them. Enough. Jiang Yan seemed to be quite dissatisfied with this person's approach, so his face turned cold on the spot. However, that person still didn't care, but looked around curiously, especially at the complicated structure of the viaduct not far away. If Qin Shi were here, he would definitely feel very puzzled. Since when did Jiang Jingqing dare to talk to Jiang Yan like this? That's right, the middle-aged man walking side by side with Jiang Yan at this moment was Jiang Jingqing, who was previously beaten into the ground by Qin Shi. Although Jiang Jingqing was arrogant and unruly, he was still a member of the Jiang family, and the Jiang family's ancestral teachings had long been branded in his blood and marrow, so naturally, he couldn't be so disrespectful to Jiang Yan. So the person in front of him. It couldn't be Jiang Jingqing at all. Don't blame me for not warning you, this Mr. Chen isn't someone you can afford to offend. If you want to overthrow Heaven Capital, then you must need his help, and you can't afford to be on bad terms with him. Seeing Jiang Yan's serious look, Jiang Jingqing also withdrew his previous frivolity and became much more serious, so he replied in a deep voice, I know. Seeing this, Jiang Yan didn't say anything more. The reason he suddenly came to visit Qin Shi today was to let his companions see Mr. Chen's abilities. Not to mention Mr. Chen's cultivation, it wasn't difficult to see that this person was definitely not someone to be trifled with just by looking at the restrictions inside and outside the four-part courtyard. Jiang Jingqing obviously knew his limits. However, after a moment of silence, he couldn't help but ask, I still feel a little strange. You and I have lived for thousands of years, so why haven't we heard of such a person in the world? Are you so sure he's not from Heaven Capital? After hearing Jiang Jingqing's words, Jiang Yan didn't immediately answer, presumably thinking about the reason behind it. After a long while, Jiang Yan frowned and said, it shouldn't be. Based on the strength this person has shown before, he's at least above the level of a divine general, or even at the level of a heavenly venerable. Over the years, no divine general has defected from Heaven Capital, and no heavenly venerable has died, so he can't be from Heaven Capital. Moreover, I think Wushu really doesn't seem to know him. Hearing this, it was Jiang Jingqing's turn to be silent again. It wasn't until the two of them walked side by side for a long distance that Jiang Jingqing said with a serious face, I think this matter needs to be considered at length, so don't act rashly. Chapter 393. December 24th, Christmas Eve, Christmas Eve. With the rapid development of Huaxia over the years, the common people gradually began to understand and accept Western culture. Christmas was the most important holiday in Western countries. No matter how much Donghua Gate Kindergarten promoted traditional culture, they could not deliberately ignore it. Otherwise, how was it different from closing the country off? Therefore, Christmas was the only Western festival that Donghua Gate Kindergarten celebrated. Since it was a holiday, they naturally had to arrange themed activities. Playing with the children was secondary. The school mainly wanted the children to understand the differences between Chinese and Western culture more easily and understand the meaning of Christmas. They also hoped to cultivate the children's interest in learning English. After all, no matter how Huaxia developed in the future, it was imperative to integrate with the international community. Therefore, learning English was definitely beneficial to the children. The winter break would start in the middle of next month. Therefore, the kindergarten would usually set this day as the Winter Parent-Child Activity Day, requiring the parents to attend. The parent-child activity could not only promote the emotional exchange between the children and their parents, but it was also beneficial to the healthy growth of the children's body and mind. Naturally, its importance was needless to say. The kindergarten hoped that every child's parents could be present. For this reason, they gave the parents a notice half a month in advance, which could be considered as leaving sufficient time for the parents to prepare. Qin Ruoying originally wanted to participate. However, because she had taken the largest portion of the elixir some time ago, if she did not go into seclusion to digest it in time, much of the medicinal effect would be wasted. The adumbra flower was so precious. Wouldn't it be a pity to waste it? Qin Ruoying's aptitude was very ordinary. If she did not rely on external help, then when would she be able to break through to the celestial being level? She had no choice but to repeatedly persuade her. After the little fellow said that she must let her mother have a good rest, Roying reluctantly returned to her room and went into seclusion. Roying could not be present, and she had other arrangements that day. Therefore, he had to find someone to take care of Nian for him temporarily. This important task, naturally, it fell on his sister-in-law's shoulders. For this, she specially called out his sister-in-law, who was in seclusion. Qin Shueqing had always been impatient with Nian, as if she didn't like children. However, she knew very well, Qin Shueqing was a typical example of a woman who said she didn't want to, but her body reacted honestly. Nian was taken care of by her sister-in-law, but the brothers were in trouble. The last time the two of them complained in the classroom that they didn't have a father, so she wanted Xia Kaiji to attend the Christmas party in person, hoping to ease the estrangement between father and son. After all, blood is thicker than water. When she proposed this idea, although Gu Lao still felt a little uncomfortable in his heart, he did not speak out against it. On the other hand, the reaction of the two brothers was obviously a bit too extreme. "We don't have a father." "No. No. There isn't. We don't want Daddy. I just want my mother." The two brothers said one after another, and no matter what, they refused to acknowledge this father. This made Xia Kaiji, who was hiding outside the tea house, so sad that he shed tears. When he received Shi's call, Xia Kaiji was full of joy, thinking that Gu Lao had finally forgiven him. Unexpectedly, the children actually refused to acknowledge him. How could Xia Kaiji not feel sad? She tried to persuade the two brothers, but how could children easily give in when they were stubborn? Whoever tied the bell should untie it. She suddenly thought of Gu Yao, so he used the soul crystal to directly summon Gu Yao's soul back. After this period of recuperation, Gu Yao more or less recovered some of her consciousness. After being summoned by she quietly floated over the tea house and saw everything that happened in front of her with her own eyes. Gu Lao sat in the booth sullenly. The two brothers stood on the side crying endlessly. Xia Kaiji hid in the corner and silently wiped his tears. From the day she passed away, this happy family had already been shattered. Gu Yao was just an ordinary person, without the support of a profound cultivation base. Even with Shi's help, how long could her soul last? 3 years? 5 years? Or 10 years? In the end, she would disappear from the world, just like water evaporating. Not a single trace of her could be found. She was gone, but the children were still there. Even after 10 years, they would only be 15 or 16 years old teenagers. Gu Lao was already old. Did he really want them to grow up alone like wild children, without anyone to rely on? Gu Yao was persuaded by Shi, and she finally figured it out. After the resentment that had shrouded her heart for a long time dissipated, her soul seemed to be a little purer. Then, Gu Yao quietly came to the two brothers. She didn't know what she said to the two brothers, but they quickly quieted down and obediently followed Shi out of the tea house, standing in front of their biological father again. "Daddy," the two brothers hesitated for a long time, and then finally called out, "Daddy." The moment he heard these two words, the man who was shining in the workplace finally couldn't hold it anymore. He knelt on the ground, his hands tightly hugged the two brothers. Because of a moment of excitement, Xia Kaiji actually let out a whimper. "I'm sorry. Yao Yao. I'm sorry." He touched the two brothers' face, looking at them who obviously grew a lot taller. His tear-stained face couldn't help but reveal a trace of smile. "I'm sorry, it's all Daddy's fault. Daddy let you suffer. I'm sorry, Yao Yao, I regret it so much." Xia Kaiji repented painfully, but he didn't know that every word he said now floated into Gu Yao's heart without missing a single word. Gu Yao came to Xia Kaiji's back, as usual, gently hugged him from the back. But it was a pity, Xia Kaiji could no longer feel that kind of feeling from before. Shi quietly returned to the tea house, leaving the warm moment to Xia family's father and son. Sister-in-law sat in the booth, bored to death, flipping through the book, as if she was not interested in everything around her. The Christmas party will only start after school. Nian was still in school. The two brothers were taken out by Qin Shi. Qin Shueqing seemed to be dissatisfied with Qin Shi because of this trivial matter, so when she saw Qin Shi came over, she rolled her eyes at Qin Shi, and then turned her body to the side. Seeing this, Qin Shi didn't take it to heart, but directly sat in front of her, and smiled and asked, "Let me ask you a question. Why did you say you are cultivating?" Sister-in-law didn't answer. She didn't even bother to lift her eyelids. Qin Shi waited for a while. Seeing that she still didn't speak, he continued to say, "Your so-called cultivation, first of all, is to get rid of the distracting thoughts, not to care about the chaos of the mortal world, or else, if the heart is not calm, it will mess up your actions. But why do I feel? This kind of cultivation is no different from getting rid of feelings. Humans have 7 emotions and 6 desires. Getting rid of feelings, getting rid of desires, is that still a human?" After hearing this sentence, Qin Shueqing finally reacted. She looked at Qin Shi with a speechless face, and just as she was about to say something, Qin Shi stood up and walked out. Before she left, Qin Shi didn't even look back as she threw down a sentence. This situation was very similar to the last time they talked. I'll also leave you with a sentence: who doesn't cultivate in life? Through the years of wind, frost, rain, and snow, feel the mellow and long life, the gains. Chapter 394. 7:00 in the evening. The lanterns were lit, and the night was still dark. Shangjing City was shrouded in darkness, and the Forbidden City was sleeping soundly. Donghua Gate Kindergarten, which was only a street away from the Forbidden City, was brightly lit and lively for the first time today. The children had just finished dinner when the Christmas-themed party slowly began. Shangjing's winter was very cold, so the party could only be held in each class. Under Qin Shi's repeated requests, Qin Shueqing reluctantly walked into the classroom. It had to be said that Qin Shueqing's image was indeed very outstanding. As soon as she stepped into the classroom, she successfully attracted everyone's attention. The classroom, which was noisy before, instantly became much quieter because of this. Which child's parent is this? So beautiful. Why haven't I seen her before? Is she a star? I don't know, this is the first time I've seen her. Look, she's here, she's here. In the classroom, regardless of gender, age, everyone couldn't help but look at Qin Shueqing a few more times. There were indeed many good-looking people in this world. Almost all of them were beauties in magazines and on TV, but it was extremely rare to see a beauty in real life. Beauty was one thing, but the other was because of temperament. When a living person stood in front of you, the temperament she exuded would directly affect the overall beauty of this person. Qin Shueqing was indeed very beautiful. But what was really eye-catching about her was actually her temperament, which was like an iceberg. Extremely beautiful, but at the same time daunting. She was like a holy mountain on the plateau, which could only be looked up at, but could not be climbed. Auntie. Auntie. I'm here. As soon as Qin Shueqing walked into the classroom, the little girl immediately noticed her, so she excitedly waved her little hand at her. Seeing this, Qin Shueqing went straight to the little girl and sat down. Qin Shueqing had always been indifferent to the little girl, but this little girl was very affectionate to her. Therefore, as soon as Qin Shueqing sat down, the little girl very intimately lay on her lap, then raised her little head and asked in a coquettish voice, "Auntie. Where's Daddy? Why isn't Daddy here?" "Don't worry, he'll be here soon." "Oh, okay." Hearing this, the little guy nodded obediently, then reached out to pick up a piece of candy from the table and handed it to Qin Shueqing. "Auntie, have some candy." "No need, I've already eaten." Oh, after not seeing each other for a long time, the little fellow wanted to be intimate with Qin Shueqing, but she didn't expect that Qin Shueqing was still indifferent to her. However, the little boy did not mind at all. Instead, he stuck close to Qin Shueqing and started to play by himself. "Hello, Miss Qin." Xia Kaiji had already met Qin Shueqing before, so he nodded to her politely. However, he was tactful and didn't try to talk to Qin Shueqing. After greeting her, he continued to whisper with the two brothers. Xia Kaiji didn't strike up a conversation with Qin Shueqing, but Wang Junsheng and Zhao Ziyu couldn't hold it anymore. In front of a peerless beauty, as a normal man, how could he not let his imagination run wild? What's more, the two of them had always felt that they were superior. They were rich and powerful, so naturally, they wouldn't shrink back just because Qin Shueqing showed a sour face. Hello, are you Nianyan's aunt? I am. Wang Junsheng tried to talk to Qin Shueqing with the help of the child. However, before he finished speaking, Qin Shueqing said coldly, not interested. After that, Qin Shueqing closed her eyes directly and sat in the classroom with her eyes closed. Wang Junsheng was given the cold shoulder and had no choice but to get together with Zhao Ziyu resentfully. Although the two of them were nearly 10 years apart, they had the same bad ideas. Therefore, after giving Wang Junsheng a look, Zhao Ziyu secretly took out his cell phone and prepared to secretly take a photo of Qin Shueqing for investigation. However, the moment Zhao Ziyu turned on the camera, a stream of vital essence hit the cell phone, causing the screen to turn off. Zhao Ziyu fiddled with the cell phone for a long time and found that it couldn't be turned on. He had to take a deep look at Qin Shueqing, trying to remember her appearance. Qin Shueqing naturally knew what he was doing, so she opened her eyes and prepared to teach Zhao Ziyu a lesson. However, at this moment, a burst of cheerful music suddenly sounded in the classroom. Ding ding dang, bell ding dang, how happy we are skiing, we sit on the sleigh, ding ding dang, bell ding dang, how happy we are skiing, we sit on the sleigh. The moment the accompaniment of ding ding dang sounded, all the children in the class sang together with the teacher. This was a surprise prepared by the teacher for the parents. The moment the music sounded, the Christmas lights in the classroom were all lit up. After the teacher took out the Christmas spray and sprayed it on the glass, the atmosphere in the classroom was suddenly pushed to the highest point. Every child's face was filled with the most enthusiastic smile. Since it was a parent-child activity, naturally parents and children had to play games together. The content of the game was very simple, which was to ask parents to accompany their children to make a Christmas card. Looking at the scissors, glue, colored pens, and socks on the table, Qin Shueqing's expression froze on the spot. When had she ever made these things in her life? But she had no choice. She had already promised Qin Shi that she would take care of Nianyan for him. Even if Qin Shueqing was unwilling now, she had to be patient and accompany the little girl to pick up the scissors and paintbrush, and began to make the first Christmas card in her life. While teaching everyone how to make a card, the teacher told a short story about Christmas on the podium. The most attractive one was, of course, Santa Claus who gave gifts to every child on Christmas Eve. After telling the story, the teacher motioned for everyone to stop what they were doing for a while, and then announced loudly, "Children, look, who's here?" After that, the teacher pointed to the door of the classroom. Then, Santa Claus, wearing a red coat and a long white beard appeared outside the door. Santa Claus. The moment Santa Claus appeared, the children were in an uproar. He held a big red bag with many small gifts in it. As soon as he entered the classroom, he began to give the children gifts, and at the same time, he gave them an apple that meant peace. Finally, Santa Claus came to the little girl. The little girl eagerly took the apple from the old man's hand, looked up, and found that the face hidden under the beard was particularly familiar. Dad? He was indeed a biological child. Even if Qin Shi was wearing a beard, the little girl still recognized him at a glance. Dad! The little girl excitedly jumped up and was about to go forward and hug Qin Shi, but Qin Shi made a shushing gesture to her. Shoo, don't let others know that Dad is Santa Claus. This is a secret. If you tell others, Dad can't be Santa Claus. Hearing this, the little girl suddenly nodded quickly like a chicken pecking at rice. I won't say. I won't say. For the little girl, there was obviously nothing more surprising than her father being Santa Claus. The little girl was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth, but her sister-in-law had a speechless expression. She never thought, Qin Shi asked her to come out and take care of Nianyan, just to make a cameo appearance as Santa Claus tonight? Did he make a mistake? In fact, since the school proposed the Christmas-themed party, Chin-shi went to discuss with the teacher, hoping that he could make a cameo appearance as Santa Claus. Originally, Santa Claus was to be played by the kindergarten staff, but since there were children's parents who were willing to make a cameo appearance, the teacher naturally wouldn't reject, and so today's event happened. Of course, this secret couldn't be known by the other children, otherwise, they would be envious. This was the surprise that Chin-shi specially prepared for Nyan. From the little girl's reaction, his goal was achieved. Therefore, the first surprise that Nyan experienced in her life. Chapter 395. Since she found out that her father was Santa Claus, the little girl had been very excited. She wanted to share the joy in her heart with the two brothers, but she had scruples about Chin-shi's warning just now, so she could only hold her little face and wriggle with excitement all night. Maybe it was because Chin-shi was sitting next to her today, so when the little girl drew the Christmas card, she specially drew it for her. This is Dad. This is Mom. This is Auntie. After drawing the card, the little girl handed the card to Chin-shi as if she was presenting a treasure. When Chin Wanqing saw the little red person with a big belly on the card, the corners of her mouth couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. Wasn't this chubby Santa Chin-shi? Looking at Nyan's little face that had turned red because of happiness. Suddenly, Chin-shi seemed to finally understand Chin-shi's idea. With such a daughter, what more could a man ask for? It was said that a daughter was her father's little lover in his last life, wasn't it, because the first man in the world who saw her smile or cry was her father. The first man in the world who hugged her and kissed her was her father. The first man in the world who dared to say to her that he would always be by her side was also her father. Her father was her daughter's most firm and dependable support, and also the most affectionate and sincere man in the world to her. Only her father would care about her and love her without asking for anything in return. Her father would never be like other men. Yesterday, he kept saying that he loved you, but today, he would stab you with the sharpest knife. In short, no matter what her father did, he always had only one starting point, and that was for the good of his daughter. As for whether his daughter could feel and understand the strong father's love in it, it was obviously another matter. A father's love was like a mountain, and a mother's love was like water. The mountain was high, mighty, and magnificent. The mountain was high, and the scenery was moving. The water was good, and the flow was meticulous. It was trickling, soft, and flowing continuously. This was a Christmas full of joy and joy. After the cards were finished, the teacher asked the children to give the cards to the people they wanted to give them to the most. Some children, under the guidance of their parents, gave the cards to their teachers. Some of the children gave the cards to their parents. Only the little girl did not do so. Instead, she put the greeting card into her small school bag. The teacher noticed her unusual behavior, so he came to her side and gently asked her who she wanted to give the card to. Hearing this, the little girl stared at her with her big eyes and asked in confusion, "Teacher, didn't you say that if we give the patients a card, they will get better faster? Mom is sick. I want to give this card to my mother. That way, Mom will recover faster." After saying that, the little girl patted her school bag like a treasure. It seemed that she had high expectations for this greeting card. Chin-shi had lied to her that her mother was sick, and the little girl had always kept this matter in her heart. Patients needed more care and attention. This 5-year-old child had already learned how to care for others. Chin-shi fell silent. She gently stroked the little fellow's head, but didn't say a word. Because she finally understood, what exactly was his sister searching for back then? 10,000 Holy Valley was too cold. The stubborn feudal clan rules restricted her thoughts. So all along, she only had one pursuit in her heart. That was to cultivate, and cultivate again. Why cultivate? To ascend. But, wasn't ascension another form of liberation? It was only at this moment that Chin-shi truly saw her own heart clearly. She seemed to be strong and decisive, but in fact, she was much weaker than Qin Ruoying. At least, her sister could violate the clan rules in order to pursue what she wanted, but she could only numb herself by cultivating day and night. Just like what Qin said, humans had 7 emotions and 6 desires. This was an unavoidable fact. If one extinguished their emotions and desires, would they still be human? Looking at Nianyan's innocent and beautiful smile, Qin Shueqing suddenly felt enlightened. She closed her eyes, and the vital energy in her body suddenly began to flow slowly. Under her influence, a faint breeze suddenly blew through the originally closed doors and windows of the classroom. The wind blew the paper on the picture album on the table, and also gently brushed the faces of all the children. No one noticed that something was wrong with her. This woman with exceptional talent and excellent aptitude. She actually had an epiphany just like that. At this moment, Qin had also changed and returned to the classroom. He noticed that Qin Shueqing was acting strangely, so he immediately set up a restriction to ensure that her epiphany would not be disturbed by the outside world. "Dad, what's wrong with Auntie? Auntie is tired. Let her rest for a while. She'll be fine soon." "Oh. Then let's speak softly. Don't disturb Auntie." "Good girl, you're sensible." His sister-in-law had an epiphany. After the Christmas party ended, she went home and shut herself in. The secular world tempered her heart, and she took it with equanimity. The world was full of disturbances, and her heart reflected the secular world. She just casually gave some advice, but he didn't expect Qin Shueqing to understand it completely. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry about this. After all, this question was obviously beyond the scope of the syllabus. Perhaps this was what they meant by, "Flowers planted with the intention do not bloom, but willows planted without the intention do." Ever since she found the earth soul, Qin Shueqing's cultivation level shot up like a rocket. Qin Ruoying had the best resources, but her cultivation progress was still like a tortoise's crawl. There was no obvious improvement at all. Everyone had their own fate. Fortunately, Qin Ruoying was not a narrow-minded person. Otherwise, she would be depressed to death if she saw this situation. December 31st. It was the last day of the year. She waited outside the west wing door, like a father waiting for his child to be born. He paced back and forth in the courtyard, slightly anxious. Suddenly, a strong wave of spirit energy surged out from the west wing. She immediately jumped into the room as if he had been electrocuted. As soon as he entered, he saw Qin Ruoying sitting cross-legged on the bed and looking at him with a yinging smile. Qin Ruoying had finally fully digested the effects of the spirit pill and officially came out of seclusion. "Come, Yingying, let me see if there are any side effects." As Qin spoke, she moved closer to Qin Ruoying with a bashful face. In fact, Qin Ruoying had only broken through to the diviner stage. It wasn't a forced breakthrough, so how could there be any danger? She was taking the opportunity to take advantage of her. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying didn't hesitate. Instead, she offered her red lips and gently pecked Qin's face. "Not enough, not enough. You have to do it here too. In your dreams, not kissing? Then I'll kiss you instead. Aya, stop fooling around. Come on, just one, he. They were obviously an old couple, but when the two of them were together, they were still as sweet as before. After a round of lovemaking, Qin Ruoying gently leaned on Qin's shoulder and then chatted with him casually. "How has Nianyan been doing during this time?" "Very good. She even made you a greeting card." "When is the school holiday?" "Around the middle of next month." "So soon. Why don't we take Nianyan out for a trip when she's on holiday?" "Oh. Where do you want to go?" "Anywhere is fine as long as you're with me." "Okay, you've worked hard during this time. I'll arrange it. When the time comes, let's go on a trip around the world as a family. How about that?" The word cultivation was never the topic of conversation between husband and wife. They preferred to live in the moment and enjoy the sweet time with their family. And this should be the so-called happiness, right? Therefore, the only thing Qin wanted now was to let this happiness continue to last. No one could ruin his happy life. Chapter 396. January 3rd. After the New Year's holiday, Nian and the two brothers reluctantly returned to school. They had a great time during the holiday. The short time he spent with his son made Xia Kaiji experience a kind of happiness that he had never experienced before. Therefore, he came to the tea house every day. No matter how Gu Lao gave him a hard time, he acted like nothing had happened and followed the three children around shamelessly. No matter what the children wanted, Xia Kaiji would immediately run to buy it for them. Looking at his eagerness, people who didn't know would think that he had a mistress outside. As a father, Qin could naturally understand Xia Kaiji's feelings, so he didn't deliberately reject him. Instead, he gave him the responsibility of taking care of the children. In this regard, Xia Kaiji certainly couldn't ask for more. Therefore, he took the three children to stroll around Hohai every day. There were many people during the holiday. For safety reasons, Qin even let the big cat follow them all the way to prevent the three children from getting lost. With a young and strong nanny like Xia Kaiji, Qin immediately became free. He could finally free up some time to spend a few days with Qin Ruoying in their sweet two-person world, falling in love, getting married, having children. Each stage would give people different insights. After changing from a two-person world to a three-person world, life would become trivial and repetitive, and there would no longer be the romance when two people were together. Even if 500 years had passed, Qin was still a romantic person. So every morning, as soon as Xia Kaiji took the three children out of the tea house, Qin took Qin Ruoying to start their honeymoon trip. Just as the lyrics say, I want to take you to romantic Turkey, then go to Tokyo and Paris. Actually, I really like Miami and Los Angeles with black people. Other people traveled by walking, but Qin traveled by flying. In a short span of 3 days, he had brought Qin Ruoying around the earth once. From Asia to Europe, from North America to South America. They rode in Venice and saw the sea in the Aegean Sea. They went to Iceland to enjoy the polar scenery, and then went to Africa to experience the tropical scenery. America's Grand Canyon, Egypt's pyramids, Turkey's Cotton Island, Maldives' Sea of Stars, everyone had their own experience with traveling. And Qin's experience was, the world is so big, I only want you by my side. When Nian came home every night, she would happily tell her mother where she had been, but she didn't know, when she was still squeezing around in Shangjing City, her father had already brought her mother to play all over the world. It was a happy holiday, a sweet time that only belonged to mom and dad. The little guy was still young, so he naturally didn't understand the world of adults. Perhaps out of compensation, Qin decisively decided, when Nian turned 16, he would take her to travel around the world. She was a girl after all, so she naturally had to be pampered. The higher one's horizons were, the harder it was for them to be fooled. In this regard, Qin even had a malicious fantasy. When Nian grew up, if a boy chased her and said that he wanted to take her on a trip, Nian would respond with disdain, where are we going? The moon? If it's not the moon, then stop, my dad has already taken me to play all over the world. Thinking of this, Qin's mouth couldn't help but reveal a smug smirk. He really wanted to know, under his wise guidance, who could easily trick Nian away from him. Humph. How dare you lie to Nian? I'll break your leg for you. The holiday was over, and the days immediately returned to the usual peace. Qin seemed to be idling around all day with nothing to do, but she was secretly playing a big game of chess. The reason why he suddenly took Qin Ruoying on a trip around the world was, on one hand, to enjoy the two of them, and on the other hand, it was completely because of Wushu. As the saying goes, if you don't kill the snake, it will eventually be harmful. After Wushu escaped with serious injuries, Qin did think of looking for him. But in this vast sea of people, where should he go to find him? Wushu was like an injured poisonous snake, hiding in a dark corner of the earth, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The earth was very big. But for cultivators of their level, the earth was still too small. This feeling was like having a poisonous snake at home, but Qin couldn't find it no matter how hard he tried. Qin wasn't afraid of poisonous snakes. But Nian and Ying were afraid. With Wushu's cultivation level, other than Qin, who else could deal with him? It was imperative to get rid of the source of the problem. Therefore, Qin set up restrictions in most areas of the world. These restrictions were equivalent to radars, each covering a range and sensing the fluctuation of spirit energy in the area at all times. As long as Wushu attacked within the range of the restrictions, Qin would be able to detect his location immediately. Of course, if Wushu didn't attack, Qin wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Anyway, let's take it slow, let's see who has more patience. Needless to say, Qin's idea was very good. But he didn't expect this at all. Life always brings unexpected surprises to people. The weather was sunny today, the highest temperature was 6 degrees Celsius. Qin moved a chair to sit in the courtyard, basking in the sun while teaching Qin Ruoying his experience of condensing the core. The so-called cultivation naturally couldn't be achieved overnight. Dual cultivation and whatnot, that was something that only evil cultivators would practice. Qin claimed to be a good youth, so naturally, he wouldn't use this method to forcefully raise Qin Ruoying's cultivation level. It didn't matter if her aptitude was poor, as long as she cultivated slowly, there would be a day when she would break through. Ying, hold your breath and try to gather your vital essence in your energy center. Actually, the process of condensing the core is like forging iron. Only through repeated tempering and hammering can the impurities in the iron block be beaten out, thus making the treasured sword sharper and sturdier. Qin explained in an easy-to-understand way so that Qin Ruoying could understand more easily. After listening to his explanation, Qin Ruoying started to try to refine the primordial core in her body according to his method. The difference between the primordial core and the golden core was probably the difference between iron and steel. Only after going through a lot of tempering could iron become hard. After all, after repeated forging, it would become steel. After Qin Ruoying entered a meditative state, Qin set up a restriction for her, then sat beside her and observed silently. The situation was not bad. The elixir provided Qin Ruoying with enough raw materials, so the only thing she had to do now was to put all these raw materials into a furnace, then burn them repeatedly until the golden core came out. This was a very long process. Qin watched for a while, and after confirming that Qin Ruoying did not go astray, he closed his eyes and started his own cultivation. However, not long after Qin closed his eyes, Qin Ruoying suddenly stopped. She suddenly opened her eyes, then as if she was feeling a little uncomfortable, she subconsciously reached out and rubbed her forehead. Ying? What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Qin sensed that something was wrong with her, so he immediately jumped up from his chair and appeared directly beside Qin Ruoying, then gently pressed his hand on her back. My head is a little dizzy, do I have a fever? Qin Ruoying rubbed her head, then forced a smile at Qin. What fever? You're already a diviner. How can a diviner fall sick? After saying that, Qin closed his eyes and began to sense if there was a spirit energy tied in some corner of the earth. However, after searching for a while, he did not find any signs of a spirit energy tied. It was as if the entire earth had fallen asleep. It was quiet and peaceful. Qin was a little confused. However, just as he was feeling very confused, Qin Ruoying suddenly closed her eyes and fainted beside him. Chapter 397. The moment Qin Ruoying fainted, Qin was completely stunned. He subconsciously reached out to support Qin Ruoying, but at the same time, he looked up at the sky. It was winter at the moment, but the sky in Shangjing City was blue and white, clear and boundless. The warm winter sun emitted a warm golden light. It should have been a leisurely and comfortable afternoon, but a trace of coldness gradually rose from the bottom of his heart. He picked up Qin Ruoying by the waist and looked at his lover leaning unconsciously on his shoulder. At this moment, his mind was completely blank. Why? Why exactly? Where did the spirit energy tide appear? Why didn't he notice any abnormalities? She gently placed Qin Ruoying on the bed. Then, he sat cross-legged next to his lover. Without any hesitation, he directly took out the soul crystal, and then used the amplification effect of the soul crystal to greatly enhance the strength of his divine soul. At the same time, the restrictions that She had set up all over the world seemed to have been stimulated by something. They suddenly expanded a lot, and the area they covered almost doubled. One after another, the perceptual restrictions were like a big net that covered the sky. The moment the big net opened, Shi's consciousness also spread out. In his perception, the whole world was quiet, so calm that there was not a trace of ripple. She did not believe it, so he mobilized his divine soul with all his strength, trying to bring the whole earth into his perception range. However, how big was the earth? The 7 continents only occupied 29% of the area, and the remaining 71% was all ocean. She was already struggling to perceive the 29% of the land, so how could he forcibly perceive the rest of the ocean? This was not a battle, and it had nothing to do with the accumulation of true essence. It was purely relying on the perception of the divine soul. This level of consumption had completely exceeded the limit of what he could bear. Therefore, after holding on for a few minutes, Shi's 7 orifices began to strangely bleed. Fortunately, Nian was not at home at the moment. Otherwise, wouldn't she be frightened by his current appearance? She gritted his teeth and persevered for a long time. In the end, because his spirit was unable to bear the burden, he had no choice but to stop this dangerous action. There was no sign of the tide surging, but Qin Ruoying still fainted because of dizziness. No matter how slow-witted She was, he should have figured out the reason by now. It turned out that he had been looking in the wrong direction. Previously, whenever Qin Ruoying felt dizzy, it must be when the tide was surging and the gate of heaven was about to open. This also made She fall into a misunderstanding, thinking that Yingying's illness was related to all of this. In fact, the spirit Qi tide was a blessing given to cultivators by the heavens. How could it bring bad effects to people? The crux of the problem was not because of the spirit energy tide, but because, sky-bearing art, floating dawn mirror. Every time the tide surged, the people behind the heavenly gate would take out the heaven-bearing efficacious floating mirror. Although he was not clear about the true use of this treasure, there was no doubt that, once Tiandu used the sky-bearing art, Xian Nu, who was in the lower realm, would definitely be affected. Xian Nu, Xian Nu. The names sounded good, but in reality, they were just a bunch of pitiful cannon fodder. After thinking through this point, Shi stopped all of his meaningless actions and quietly sat beside Qin Ruoying. He quietly looked at his lover's face, hoping that the first thing she saw when she woke up would be him. Unfortunately, Qin Ruoying did not wake up. It was as if she was asleep. Her breathing was slightly weak, but the frequency was orderly. She waited silently. But this time, Qin Ruoying was unconscious for a much longer time than the last time. As the light in the room dimmed bit by bit, it meant that the sun was about to set. Ring, ring, ring. Suddenly, a melodious ringtone sounded. It was Shi's cell phone. At this moment, as if he had just woken up from a dream, he suddenly realized Nian was out of school. As expected, the moment Shi picked up the phone, the little fellow's sweet voice sounded from the other end of the phone. "Daddy, where are you?" "We're out of school." Daddy was delayed by something. "I'll come pick you up now." "Wait for Daddy for one more minute, okay?" "Okay." After hanging up the phone, Shi lowered his head to look at his lover who was still in a deep sleep. After gently kissing her forehead, Shi's figure suddenly disappeared from the room. When he appeared again, he was already outside the school gate. "Daddy. Daddy. Daddy. Daddy is here to pick me up. Goodbye, teacher." As usual, the moment the little fellow saw she immediately raised her little hand, stepped forward, and ran towards him excitedly. After Shi picked up the little fellow from the ground, the 2 brothers who had been following the little fellow finally relaxed and waved goodbye to the little fellow reluctantly. The 2 of them were now picked up by Xia Kaiji's car every day. Naturally, they did not have to trouble Chin-shi every day. Daddy. Teacher taught us how to sing today. What song? Two tigers. After saying that, the little fellow grinned very proudly. If it was in the past, Chin-shi would definitely accompany her to sing all the way home. However, to the little fellow's disappointment, Chin-shi just nodded casually today, and then there was nothing else. Seeing this, the little fellow was obviously a little unhappy. Just as she was about to flare up, the little fellow suddenly seemed to have thought of something, so she immediately shut her little mouth and quietly lay on Chin-shi's shoulder. The teacher said, everyone has a time when they are in a bad mood, even Daddy and Mommy are no exception. Daddy is in a bad mood today, so I won't disturb Daddy. Nyan is very sensible. The father and daughter quickly returned home without saying anything. At this time, the little fellow finally knew why Daddy was in a bad mood. Mommy is sick again. Looking at Mommy lying on the bed, the little fellow followed Daddy's usual behavior and carefully covered Mommy with the quilt. After that, the little fellow stopped making a fuss. After eating her dinner obediently, she started to watch cartoons in silence. While watching cartoons, the little fellow would still look back at Daddy and Mommy from time to time. Daddy had been silently staying by Mommy's bedside. Although the cartoon characters on the TV kept making noises, there was a strange silence in the room from beginning to end. Time passed by, and soon it was time for the little fellow to sleep. She was sleepy. However, she did not call Daddy. Instead, she ran to the bathroom, then brought a small stool and tiptoed to turn on the tap. The sudden sound of running water startled Chin-shi. At this time, he finally realized that he had neglected Nyan, so he quickly got up to help the little fellow wash up. After washing up, Chin-shi carried her to the bed. The little girl laid down on the bed by herself, and then slipped into the warm blanket like a wisp of smoke. The little fellow covered half of her face with the quilt, only revealing a pair of bright big eyes. Then, she used her big eyes to look at Mommy who was sleeping soundly beside her, then looked at Daddy who was beside her with a cloud of worry. At that moment, the little fellow seemed to have suddenly grown up. She actually hid in the quilt and comforted him in a muffled voice, "Daddy, don't be sad. Mommy will get better." The moment he heard this sentence, Chin-shi's nose twitched, and an indescribable feeling surged in his heart. "Good girl, go to sleep. Daddy knows Mommy will get better. When Mommy gets better, Daddy will take you on a trip, okay?" "Okay." After hearing Chin-shi's words, the little fellow's face suddenly revealed a smile. Then, she suddenly sat up from the bed, leaned over and kissed Chin-shi's face heavily, then obediently lay back down. "Muah. Good night, Daddy. I'm going to sleep." Chapter 398. The little fellow was sensible. In addition to knowing not to cause trouble for Dad, she even learned how to comfort Dad. Therefore, after Nyan entered that sweet dreamland, Chin-shi let out a soft sigh in this dark room. "Dad, don't be sad, Mom will get better." The little fellow had already fallen asleep, but her words kept echoing in Chin-shi's ears. Chin-shi silently savored this sentence. After a long time, he was like the prince who kissed Snow White in the fairy tale, kissing the little fellow and Chin Roying's face one by one, then got up and left the room. As soon as he opened the door, a cold wind mixed with snowflakes suddenly hit his face. It started to snow in Shangjing City again. Chin-shi withdrew his vital essence, allowing the cold wind to wantonly enter his sleeves, and silently felt the chill brought by the cold wind. The whole sky was dark. There was only a little bit of weak moonlight, which seemed so cold. Chin-shi set up a restriction in the room, so that he could know the situation of Chin Roying at the first moment. Then, he flew directly into the dark night sky. He flew very fast, and in the blink of an eye, he had already flown out of Huaxia and arrived above the Pacific Ocean. And the destination of his trip, obviously, it was the waterless cave located in the deep sea. Deep in the cave, Bai Hong and Qing Wan were still like suffering Jesus, hanging high above the cave by Chin-shi. Chin-shi didn't want to kill indiscriminately, so he kept them here, Because of the suppression of the spirit needles and spirit-piercing needles, the injuries of the two people did not get any treatment, but worsened a lot, so they looked very bad. Being in prison was actually a very terrifying thing, especially this kind of cage that was similar to a small dark room. Unable to see the sun, unable to communicate with people, in this cramped and oppressive space, the most frightening and tormenting thing was, it was actually loneliness. Qing Wan's injuries were more serious, so she could only be awake for about 2 or 3 hours a day, and at other times, she was in a self-protective coma. Qin Shi came at the right time today, just when Qing Wan was awake. Bai Hong and Qing Wan were talking in a low voice. As soon as they heard the movement caused by Qin Shi flying out of the cold pool, a trace of fear flashed across their faces. Yes, Divine General Tiandu was also afraid. After a long period of confinement, they had developed a fear of Qin Shi. They were not afraid of death, but they were afraid of this endless loneliness. Come. Kill me. Kill me. The moment Qin Shi appeared, Qing Wan was like an enraged beast, crazily roaring at Qin Shi. As he roared, he spat at Qin Shi in an attempt to infuriate Qin Shi so that she would kill him. Do you want to die so much? Then I to you, Qing to Tiandu to Tiandu to be to kill to Tiandu to die to be killed. Then, a stream of qi like a heavy hammer smashed into Qing Wan's chest. Qing Wan was already injured, and after suffering such a heavy blow, she immediately spat out a large mouthful of blood. She could only hang her head weakly, and it seemed that she had lost half of her life. Stop. You're going to kill him like this. Seeing this, Bai Hong could not help but be anxious. Although she also had the idea of dying early and being free, it was just a thought. Even ants craved for life, not to mention them, the divine generals. Bai Hong did not want to die, and was even more unwilling to see Qing Wan die in front of her. Qin Shi would not come for no reason. Today, he suddenly came. There must be something to ask. Therefore, after a strong struggle in her mind, Bai Hong asked in a tone that was close to begging for mercy, "What do you want to know?" As long as it does not involve the core of Tiandu, I can tell you without reservation. Is that so? Hearing this, Qin Shi smiled with satisfaction. But that smile, it looked a little cold. I want to know everything about the sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror. Can you tell me? As he spoke, Qin Shi slowly rose from the ground, and then flew straight to Qing Wan. He was obviously talking to Bai Hong, but he used his qi to lift Qing Wan's head, and began to size up this poor divine general who was covered in wounds. Bai Hong of course understood what Qin Shi meant. If she kept silent, Qin Shi would obviously use the soul-sucking technique on Qing Wan. Seeing this, Bai Hong replied rather straightforwardly, "Sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror? No problem, I can tell you, that is the treasure left behind by the divine ancestor. We now call it, soul mirror." Soul mirror? Qin Shi repeated this name, then frowned and asked, "What is its use?" Hearing this, Bai Hong immediately answered honestly, "The 5 great temples and the 13 soul-gathering cauldrons are all related to the soul mirror. Simply put, you can see it as the key to open the gate of heaven. Don't blame me for not telling you. Although the soul mirror is a treasure, it has no practical use. Apart from when it is needed to open the gate of heaven, it can only be placed in the imperial hall as a decoration." Bai Hong thought that Qin Shi was after the divine ancestor's treasure, so she couldn't help but remind him. However, after hearing this, Qin Shi continued to ask, "If I were to ascend from the lower realm and enter the gate of heaven, where would I appear? Where is the imperial hall? Who is usually in charge of the soul mirror? What is this person's cultivation? Are there any other defensive arrangements around it?" Bai Hong was stunned by Qin Shi's series of questions. He stared blankly at Qin Shi for a long while before saying in shock, "You're actually thinking about the soul mirror?" Qin Shi roared impatiently, "Answer my question." Bai Hong was really scared. Looking at Qin Shi's attitude, he really wanted to go to the imperial hall to snatch the soul mirror? What kind of place was the imperial hall? That was the core of the divine capital, equivalent to the emperor's throne room. Are you crazy? Bai Hong looked at Qin Shi speechlessly. At this moment, Chen Shi looked like a bloodthirsty gambler. Seeing that Bai Hong was unwilling to answer, he actually pressed his hand on Qing Wan's head and used the soul-snatching technique. In fact, the soul-snatching technique was not as exaggerated as Chen Shi had said before. This technique had a lot of restrictions. After using it, one could only inquire about some insignificant surface information. If it involved important secrets, the target's soul would automatically hide it, making the caster unable to pry. Since Qing Wan was a divine general of the divine capital, he obviously had a detailed understanding of the layout of the Imperial Hall. To Qing Wan, the Imperial Hall was no secret at all. Naturally, it would not be deliberately protected by his soul. Chapter 399. He saw, the moment Chen Shi pressed his palm on Qing Wan's head, Qing Wan seemed to have been electrocuted. Her body twitched violently in the unconscious state. Bai Hong was stunned. He never thought that Chen Shi would actually really deal such a vicious blow to Qing Wan. Stop. At that instant, Bai Hong's eyes were about to split. However, due to the suppression of the soul-setting needle, he could only watch as the Azure One was tortured. Bai Hong struggled with all her might, her eyes flashing with uncontrollable anger. He gnashed his teeth so hard that they creaked, and he looked like a ferocious beast that had lost all reason due to rage. He wished for nothing more than to pounce forward and tear Chen Shi into pieces. But unfortunately, this was just Bai Hong's wishful thinking. Chen Shi was like a cold robot. He completely ignored the pain and anger in his heart and searched for all the information in Cyan Phoenix's mind. Since it was a forced soul search, this secret technique would naturally put a huge burden on the target's divine soul. Therefore, it didn't take long before blood began to seep out of the 7 orifices of the Green Phoenix, just like when Chen Shi forcibly perceived the entire world. Bai Hong stared blankly as everything unfolded. He didn't understand the soul-snatching secret technique and thought that what Chen Shi had said to scare him was true. Bai Hong could accept that Chen Shi had directly killed Qing Wan because their skills were not as good as his. But he couldn't accept it. Chen Shi used this method to torture Qing Wan. Absolutely not. I'm going to kill you. I'll kill you. Anger gives strength, as long as it is not mixed with the hesitation and apprehension of the weak. It was precisely because of this, Bai Hong, who was already on the verge of death, actually burst out with an extremely strong true essence fluctuation from his body. This surge of true essence was too ferocious, and it actually shook off the golden needles that Chen Shi had inserted into his body one by one. Chen Shi didn't even have time to withdraw the secret method from Qing Wan's body before Bai Hong rushed towards him like a tiger that had just escaped from its cage. Die. Bai Hong's face was strangely flushed. As soon as he broke free, his body constantly emitted a strong true essence fluctuation. Bai Hong's current state was very strange. He was clearly wounded all over, and there was barely a tenth of the Jin Yuan left in his body, but he was still able to release Jin Yuan fluctuations that were far stronger than when he was at his peak. Before it could attack, the true essence slammed into the wall again and again, causing the entire cave to tremble violently. After Bai Hong let out a roar, he immediately waved his right hand and slapped Chen Shi's head fiercely. At this time, I see that you're a man. I don't want to take your life, so I advise you. Under Chen Shi's constant persuasion, Bai Hong finally stopped. He could not catch up, and he could not beat him. What else could he do? He was also very desperate. The two confronted each other across the trench. After a long while, only then did Bai Hong say in a deep voice, I only have one request. If you agree, you can kill me or cut me up as you wish in the future. If not, I can only fight to the death with you. In this regard, Chen Shi was very magnanimous, so he responded readily, okay, say it. Don't use such despicable means again, or I won't let you go even if I become a ghost. Chen Shi naturally did not take Bai Hong's threat to heart. However, he still gave Bai Hong a definite answer. I can promise you, but there's a condition. you must make a heart demon oath and promise that you won't hide anything from me. You must answer all the questions I ask you in full detail. If you hide anything, you will be swallowed by the oath." Hearing this, Bai Hong did not immediately answer. Instead, his eyes flickered, and no one knew what he was thinking. Of course, Chen Shi knew what he was thinking, so he immediately added, "Don't worry, I have no interest in going against Tiandu. The reason why I want the soul mirror is entirely because of my wife. She is the arbiter of fate Xian Nu, so, do you understand?" After hearing Chen Shi's words, Bai Hong's expression softened. Because of the arbiter of fate Xian Nu? So that's why. Bai Hong thought seriously for a while, and after receiving Chen Shi's repeated assurances, he finally stopped his suicidal behavior. Although the Yuanying had not yet burned out, it had caused extremely serious damage that was almost irreversible. Therefore, the moment Bai Hong removed his inner yuan, he seemed to have aged many years, and his appearance changed from that of a young man in his 20s to that of a middle-aged man in his 40s. When Chen Shi saw his sickly appearance and that even flying was a problem, he kindly helped him stabilize his injuries and flew him back to the cave. On the way back, Bai Hong seemed to have finally figured something out, and he suddenly turned to Chen Shi and said, "You have the strength of a celestial venerable. Tiandu shouldn't make an enemy of you for no reason. Since everything you've done is for your wife, I can tell you where the soul mirror is. I only hope that you can keep your promise." Hearing this, Chen Shi was overjoyed, and he hurriedly asked, "No problem. As long as you can cure my wife, everything is negotiable. If nothing unexpected happens, the soul mirror should still be in my junior brother's hands." "Your junior brother? Where is he? Did he come down with you?" "When we came, junior brother was still cultivating with master. Now that we haven't returned to Tiandu yet, I'm sure master will personally come down to check. When that time comes, junior brother might come with him." "Alright, what's your junior brother's name? I'll make a note of it so that I can find him in the future." "He's called Wushu." "What? Wushu?" The moment she heard this name, Chen Shi's entire body felt unwell. Chapter 400. Even if Bai Hong burned his Yuanying, he was still no match for Chen Shi. Chen Shi avoided him because he did not want to waste his energy. After all, if he could solve the problem peacefully, why would he need to resort to violence? The result was, of course, a happy ending. Bai Hong's life was saved, and Chen Shi also got the answer he wanted. However, the moment he got the answer, Chen Shi did not feel good. The sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror was actually in Wushu's hands. If he had known this would happen, Chen Shi would have left Wushu on Daiyu Island even if he burned his Yuanying that day. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. Wushu had already escaped, and at this moment, he might be hiding in some dark corner of the earth, laughing secretly. Now that things had come to this, Chen Shi's regret was useless. Therefore, he could only hope that he could successfully find Wushu and get the soul mirror from him. Since Yingying's illness was related to the soul mirror, he had to get the soul mirror no matter what method he used. For this reason, Chen Shi even had the dangerous idea of fighting his way to Tiandu. In fact, Chen Shi did not want to be enemies with anyone. Just like what he taught Nianyan on a daily basis, we do not cause trouble, but we are definitely not afraid of trouble. And this was also his daily principle. I avoided it only because I had a family. I did not want my family to take any unknown risks. The money, status, and power of the mortal world were meaningless to Chen Shi. Similarly, the rare treasures, cultivation techniques, and elixirs of the cultivation world were also dispensable to Chen Shi. After all, with Nianyan and Yingying, he already had the whole world. Why should he care about these worldly possessions? Chen Shi wanted to avoid the world. Not escape, but avoid. Avoid all unnecessary trouble. But unfortunately, avoiding was not the way to solve the problem. Since the problem had already appeared, Chen Shi could only think of a way to solve it. Fighting was not the only way to solve the problem. If it wasn't necessary, Chen Shi wasn't willing to make enemies everywhere. Therefore, he tried to communicate with Bai Hong, hoping to find another way to solve this problem from Bai Hong. Otherwise, Qin Shi might really have to fight all the way from the Heavenly Gate to the Imperial Extreme Hall. Bai Hong understood the situation. When he learned of Qin Shi's motives, he no longer tried to obstruct him. On the contrary, he hoped that Qin Shi could smoothly obtain the soul mirror and thus resolve the illness plaguing Qin Ruoying, thereby forming a good relationship with Heaven Capital. Didn't Bai Hong resent Qin Shi? Obviously, it was impossible. However, he had no choice but to lower his head under the eaves. Churchill once said, "There are no eternal friends in this world, nor are there eternal enemies, only eternal interests." Since the two of them had reached a preliminary consensus, the next priority was, obviously, he wanted to find Wushu. But in this vast sea of people, where should he go to find her? For this reason, after a serious discussion between Qin Shi and Bai Hong, they finally found a more reliable method. That was, Bai Hong appeared and used divine telekinesis to lure Wushu out. It was equivalent to humans sending signals to space to search for aliens. Qin Shi circled the world with Bai Hong, and Bai Hong continuously released divine telekinesis to lure Wushu out. No matter what, the two of them were fellow disciples and had a close relationship. With Bai Hong as a guarantor, Wushu should be able to boldly show up. This method had a certain degree of feasibility. Therefore, Bai Hong and Qing Wan temporarily broke away from their prisoner status and became Qin Shi's friends. Naturally, he couldn't treat his friends too badly. Therefore, Qin Shi brought Bai Hong and Qing Wan to Kangju district and temporarily settled them here. For safety reasons, Qin Shi didn't remove the seal in Qing Wan's body. He only relieved her internal injuries and gave her the right to move freely. After that, Qin Shi began to tour the world with Bai Hong overnight. Bai Hong's divine telekinesis range was limited, so she could only release it bit by bit. The whole process was like a salesperson sweeping the floor. She needed to go door to hand out business cards. This was a very long process. Qin Shi roughly calculated the time. Even if he flew with Bai Hong, it would take at least 3 months for Bai Hong to use divine telekinesis to sweep the world. 3 months, so be it. It was much better than being at a loss for what to do. Therefore, for the next period of time, Qin Shi still sent the little girl to and from school on time during the day and took care of her daily life. At night, after the little girl fell asleep, he would start to tour the world with Bai Hong. During this period, Bai Hong was very cooperative and didn't play any tricks the whole time. But Qin Shi's mood was getting heavier and heavier day by day. Because Qin Ruoying had not woken up. Yingying's coma time was far beyond Qin Shi's imagination. Her breathing didn't stop, and the vital essence in her body was still circulating on its own. Everything was normal, but she couldn't wake up and looked like a vegetable. Bai Hong had never seen such a situation. He didn't know much about the Siming Xian Nu, so he could only persuade Qin Shi not to worry too much. As long as they found the soul mirror, everything would naturally be solved. Both of them placed their hopes on Wushu. But they didn't know, Bai Hong's divine telekinesis had already attracted the attention of Jiang Yan and the others. This kind of indiscriminate divine telekinesis coverage was definitely undetectable by ordinary people. But in the eyes of Jiang Yan and the others, this was equivalent to holding a loudspeaker and shouting at the entrance of a village all day long, "Wushu, Wushu, where are you? Come out, I have something to talk to you about." Because of this, Jiang Yan even pretended to call Qin Shi to ask. Although they were allies, Qin Shi was still wary of this old man, so he didn't tell him the truth. He only said that he wanted to find Wushu to prevent future trouble. Jiang Yan naturally didn't believe Qin Shi's excuse. Therefore, this old man continued to follow Qin Shi for a long time and accurately guessed Qin Shi's true purpose. For Jiang Yan, Qin Shi was a great help in overturning Tiandu, so he naturally couldn't let this help become a hindrance. So, Jiang Yan began to act. No one had ever noticed this mysterious organization. It was called the 9 Serenities. There were 9 heavens in the sky and 9 layers of earth. There was Tiandu above and the 9 Serenities below. Ever since the divine ancestor led the generals of Tiandu to ascend to the great world, the sinners left behind in the lower realm were full of hatred and formed this mysterious organization. Compared to Tiandu, its strength was too insignificant. After all, they could only watch the spiritual qi dry up and witness the arrival of the end of the world. They used to be high and mighty cultivators, but now they were like maggots in the gutter. Even becoming a diviner required a great opportunity. They could be as humble as dust, but they couldn't be as twisted as maggots. The resentment that had accumulated for thousands of years, it wasn't until the emergence of the first spiritual qi tide that they finally had the opportunity to release it. The generals of Tiandu didn't even know that there was such a reactionary organization in the lower realm. But the people of the 9 Serenities had already made an oath. They only lived to overturn Tiandu and avenge the suffering of thousands of years of repression. The 9 Serenities had begun to plan a long time ago. In addition to constantly sending people to Tiandu as spies, the rest of the people were silently waiting for the opportunity. For this reason, they would rather endure hundreds or even thousands of years of loneliness and torture, just to wait for the right time. Now the time had come, and they only lacked the opportunity to blow the horn. Enchen Shi. Chapter 401. This was an era where there were no secrets. But the existence of the 9 Serenities had never been known to outsiders. After tens of thousands of years of dormancy and management, the power of the 9 Serenities had far exceeded everyone's imagination. They were like an invisible net, firmly grasping the entire earth in the palm of their hand. Whether it was the Hua Xia or other countries, from the nobles to the lowly peddlers, no one could escape the control of the 9 Serenities. It was a very simple principle. Even the Rothschild family could exist for hundreds of years, let alone a super-large organization composed of immortal cultivators like the 9 Serenities. Zhuangzi once said, "Summer insects cannot speak of ice, and children cannot speak of the sea." For immortal cultivators, fame and fortune in the eyes of mortals were meaningless. The only purpose of their existence was to one day completely overturn Tiandu and establish a new dynasty of their own, the 9 Serenities. As the spiritual energy of heaven and earth declined day by day, the celestial being almost became a threshold for cultivation. But the inheritance of the 9 Serenities was passed down generation after generation. They hid behind the scenes, providing unimaginable help to mortals, and indirectly controlling one dynasty after another in the world. Whether it was the Hua Xia Empire in the east, or the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, or the Macedonian Empire in the west, the 9 Serenities never interfered with the rise and fall of human dynasties, but they always put down their chess pieces when necessary. After all, compared to the high and mighty Tiandu, the 9 Serenities were too weak. They had to make use of all the resources available to them in order to fight a battle with Tiandu with a great disparity in strength. The winner could have everything. Just like when the Tai Ching divine ancestor led everyone to the great world and enjoyed the entire great world alone. The sinners who stayed in the lower realm could only suffer the depletion of spiritual energy and watch their inheritance deteriorate with each generation. That feeling, just like how human civilization degenerated from the universal era to the primitive era, how could the primitive people who stayed on Earth not hold a great grudge against Tiandu? The 9 Serenities was a super-large tribe formed by these primitive people. Although the divine ancestor had kindly left the divine gate and gave the descendants of the sinners a chance to ascend. However, the old man seemed to have not thought of a problem at all, and that was, if the descendants of these sinners were able to cultivate to the celestial realm in such simple conditions in the lower realm, then if they were born in the great world, how could their cultivation base stop at the celestial realm? Think about it from another perspective. I spent my entire life cultivating in the lower realm, and it took me 200 years to finally break through to the Deva realm. But when he came to Tiandu, he found that a young man in his 20s or 30s could easily become a celestial. How would the sinners of the lower bound, who had cultivated their entire lives, feel? That was how resentment was born. They could be as humble as dust, but they could not be as twisted as maggots. Such an unfair encounter had already distorted the mentality of the people of the 9 Serenities. Finally, the resentment that had accumulated in their hearts for tens of thousands of years was completely ignited with the appearance of the spirit energy tide. With the recovery of spirit qi, the human world will prosper. The 9 serenities would never allow Tiandu to return to the lower realm, because the lower realm belonged to them. It was precisely because of this, at the same time that Qin Shi led Baihong to search for Wuxu, the 9 serenities led by Jiang Yan also began to move. They did not have a soul as powerful as Qin Shi's, but they used a more effective method, which was face recognition. As long as there were cameras and internet coverage, there was no way to escape the detection of a supercomputer. Wuxu might not have thought that there would be so many people in the world looking for him. After this period of recuperation, his injuries had more or less healed. However, for safety reasons, Wuxu had never left the Arctic Circle. In addition to his daily cultivation and recuperation, this guy would lie on the iceberg, fishing and playing with polar bears. His days were quite comfortable. On this day, January 20th. It had been a full 3 months since they had escaped with the Wuxu blood escape. If compared to the time in Tiandu, it was equivalent to 24 months, which was 2 years. Everything was relative, including time. The flow of time in the great world was different from that in the lower realm. 1 year on earth was 8 years in heaven. And this was the fundamental reason why the flow of time in the Guiyao Temple was 8 times slower than the outside world. The 5 temples were directly connected to Tiandu, so the flow of time in the temples was not Earth's time, but Tiandu's time. Qin Shi used the Guiyao Temple as a cultivation place before, but he did not figure out the key point. In addition, it was also because of the time difference between the 2 realms that divine generals of Tiandu were generally unwilling to come to the lower realm. Take Wuxu for example, he had only been in the lower realm for 3 months, but 2 years had passed in heaven. What did 2 years mean? Divine generals who were about the same cultivation level as Wuxu had probably surpassed him by now. Sailing against the current, one would fall behind if they did not advance. How could Wuxu not be depressed? Not only did Qin Shi destroy the 5 temples, but he also King dispersed the spirit energy tide immediately. Without the support of the spirit energy tide, the divine gate could not be opened at all. He had a home, but he could not go back, therefore, Wuxu was as depressed as he could be at this moment. When he thought about how he had wasted 2 years in the lower realm, Wuxu's mood became particularly bad. He was not in the mood to continue cultivating, so he got up and flew out, ready to stroll around and relax. For safety reasons, Wuxu did not fly too far, but came to a human city closest to the North Pole, Longyern City. There was the northernmost bank in the world, the northernmost church in the world, and even a university in the northernmost part of the world. There were about 1,800 people in the town. Because of the polar night, the entire town would be in darkness from November to January every year, and there was not a trace of sunlight at all. The sky here was dark green, and the cold wind was bone-chilling, but the houses were colorful. Because, the 3-month-long night made this small town the most romantic place in the world. Wuxu soon arrived at Longyern City. As soon as he walked into the town, he was deeply fascinated by the colorful houses and the colorful neon lights in front of him. Therefore, Wuxu walked directly into the bar with the most people almost without any hesitation. In terms of combat power, ordinary people were no different from ants in the eyes of immortal cultivators. But in terms of playfulness, 10,000 immortal cultivators might not be as good as one ordinary person. Maybe because he had been lonely for a long time, when Wuxu came to such a lively place, he could not help but be affected by the atmosphere in the bar. Therefore, he did not even think about it, and directly removed the breath concealment technique, then sat at the bar like an ordinary customer and drank leisurely. From beginning to end, he did not realize that the thing that kept flashing red on the bar was called Chapter 402. There was no day in Longzhirali City, only 24 hours of night. This was a pure land located in the far north, the only city in the world where death was illegal. But today, this pure land was destined to be dyed red with blood. Under the long polar night, Longzhirali City was filled with a romantic atmosphere. This was the best time for the town's bar business. The bar music was turned up to the maximum, almost deafening people's ears. Tourists from all over the world were affected by the atmosphere and started to dance crazily on the dance floor. The air was filled with the smell of hormones. A coldly dressed woman mixed in with the crowd of men, laughing and joking. She used flirtatious words to tease the men who couldn't control themselves. When the man wanted to take a step further, the woman was like a slippery loach, running to another target. The woman shuttled back and forth in the crowd. Suddenly, she saw the Asian man sitting by the bar. This man was very strange. He was only wearing a strange long robe and a thin layer of clothing. The woman guessed which country's traditional clothing was from, and her interest was piqued little by little. Since he was used to eating Western food, it would be a good experience to change his tastes once in a while. The woman treated this man as her prey tonight, and sat directly next to him. There were no blondes in Tiandu. Therefore, Wushu couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly when he sensed the woman approaching him. Interesting. Even though they didn't speak the same language, the woman's ambiguous aura floated into Wushu's eyes. If it was in the past, Wushu definitely wouldn't have any interest in this kind of ant-like existence. But today was different, he was here to relax. Therefore, Wushu imitated the others and pulled the woman into his arms. The woman smiled proudly, as if she was very satisfied with her charm. However, just as the woman was about to offer her red lips and have a beautiful encounter with this mysterious Asian man, Wushu's figure mysteriously disappeared from her side. The woman was stunned for a few seconds before she let out a heart-wrenching scream. At the same time, Wushu's figure suddenly appeared above the town. It was snowing heavily outside the house, and the cold wind was bone-chilling. The visibility was less than 10 meters, but Wushu's line of sight was firmly fixed on the southeast direction. There was an extremely powerful Jin Yuan fluctuation at that location, and Wushu also sensed a trace of hostility from this wave. It was obvious that they were here for him. Seeing this, Wushu did not cower. Instead, he flew towards that direction. This was a huge iceberg that had not melted for 10,000 years. It floated on the Arctic Ocean, moving slowly with the waves. Before Wushu got close, he saw a man standing on the peak of the ice mountain with his hands behind his back. Because they had already fought before, the moment Wushu saw Jiang Yan, he couldn't help but reveal a trace of surprise. This old thief, could it be that he was tired of living and came here to seek death? While thinking, Wushu landed on the ice mountain. At this moment, Jiang Yan slowly turned around and smiled at him. Divine General Wusu, I haven't seen you in a long time. I've missed you. When Wushu heard this, a trace of disdain appeared on his face. He first looked around and after confirming that Qin was not nearby, he said coldly, I haven't even thought of looking for you, and you're already in a hurry to die? Die? No. Jiang Yan shook his head and smiled. Divine General, you don't know this, but I cherish my life very much. It wasn't easy for me to live for 1,000 years, so how could I give up my life so easily? Wushu did not immediately reply because he had already noticed that something was amiss. Jiang Yan's current state was completely different from last time. Just look at how confident he is. Even if Wushu used his but to think, he knew that if he did not have a certain amount of confidence, Jiang Yan would definitely not come all the way here to die. Wushu was confident, but he was not arrogant. Last time, Wushu was forced to use the blood escape technique by Qin Shi, and he had already suffered a great loss. Therefore, he would not allow himself to fail again. Fighting because of personal feelings was something that only children would do. Therefore, when Wushu saw how confident Jiang Yan was, he immediately wanted to retreat. At this moment, Wushu was very similar to Sima Yi, who was scared off by Zhuge Liang's empty city strategy. Regardless of what Jiang Yan was planning, there was still a long way to go. This debt, he would slowly settle it in the future. After figuring this out, Wushu didn't even say a single word. Instead, he turned into a streak of light and flew toward the horizon. However, at this moment, a golden barrier suddenly appeared in the air. This barrier was like a fishing net, directly trapping Wushu in it. Then, Jiang Yan's sinister laughter sounded again. Divine General Wushu, where are you going? Yuanyin was not easy to kill. This was something that all immortal cultivators knew. Unless one's cultivation level was suppressed, if the other party was determined to escape, it was actually very difficult to catch them. This was also the reason why Wushu was able to escape from under Qin Shi's nose. Wushu had already escaped once. Jiang Yan knew that Wushu had the blood escape secret technique, so he went back to the floating mist mountain to prepare. He brought the 9 serenities 10,000 years of savings with him just to win the first battle. Wushu should not have come here. Because once he came, he would not be able to leave. Wushu's surprise gradually turned into shock when he saw more than 100 celestial beings from Daiyu Island slowly flying toward him. In order to show the spirit of universal love of the divine ancestor, Tiandu had always maintained contact with the 5 places of inheritance so that these sinners could ascend to Tiandu in the future. And this was also the fundamental reason why All Saints Valley was able to use the spirit gathering formation to forcibly summon divine generals from heaven capital when Qin Shi flattened them. Absolutely no one would have thought the so-called 5 lands of heritage were actually branches of the 9 serenities, but this secret was only known to a few people. Everything was under the control of the 9 serenities, including Qin Shi, the apple that accidentally fell on the chessboard. Since he was on the chessboard, he was a chess piece. It was just that this chess piece was much bigger than the others. From the moment Qin Shi stepped into All Saints Valley, Jiang Yan had already known of Qin Shi's existence. Although he was a variable, he was controllable. This was why Jiang Yan had displayed an almost abnormal enthusiasm for Qin Shi when Qin Shi first set foot on Daiyu Island. It was a pleasure to have a friend from afar. Jiang Yan was guiding Qin Shi, trying to pull Qin Shi to the opposite side of Tiandu. After all, the only advantage the 9 serenities had was probably information. The enemy was in the light while I was in the dark. Jiang Yan did not know why Qin Shi was working so hard to find Wushu. But he knew very well that Wushu was not just a divine general. Wushu, he was actually Yuhuan Tianzuan's only son. If they could successfully kill Wushu, who would face Yuhuan Tianzuan's wrath? It would not be Jiang Yan, nor would it be the 9 serenities. It would be Qin Shi, who had always been at the forefront. Wushu's identity was not a secret. Almost everyone in the great world knew about it. This guy had been outstanding since he was young, but he was mischievous and disliked cultivation. Yuhuan Tianzuan could not do anything about him, so he handed him over to Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, hoping that Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells could guide this mischievous second generation back to the right path. But he did not teach his own son. The consequences were, after Wushu grew up, he did not recognize him as his father. No matter the occasion, Wushu would always call him Yuhuan Tianzuan, which almost angered him to death. In fact, from the respect Wushu showed to Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, Wushu was actually quite a sentimental person. The reason why he made Yuhuan Tianzuan angry was probably because he had a special father-son relationship with Yuhuan Tianzuan. Yuhuan Tianzuan probably knew this too. So even though he was usually cold to Wushu, he was secretly very concerned about this son of his. Through Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, he indirectly gave Wushu all kinds of Dharma treasures. This was a very strange father-son relationship. It seemed distant, but it was also very close. So, when Wushu saw the yin-yang 6 directions array being activated again, a relieved smile suddenly appeared on his face. It was the same array formation, but the person who said it was completely different. Wushu held the flag in his hand, already understanding what he was about to face. So, before Jiang Yan made a move, Wushu suddenly raised his head and let out a long howl. Yuhuan Tianzuan, oh Yuhuan Tianzuan, this time, I'm really going to fall. Although you can't hear me, but I'll call you again, father. Speaking of this, Wushu's expression suddenly froze. Immediately after, he did not forget to ridicule himself. As expected, I'm not used to it after not calling you for a long time, Yuhuan Tianzuan. Did you hear that? Your son is being bullied, remember to avenge him. Father. Wushu did not say the last word out loud. Instead, he silently repeated it in his heart. Then, he raised the Wuji apricot yellow flag high up, and like the only remaining flag bearer on the battlefield, he charged towards the 9 underworlds led by Jiang Yan alone. Even if the entire army was killed, the flag bearer could not fall. If he fell, it would be a true annihilation. Jiang Yan looked at Wushu coldly. Even though Wushu was surrounded, Jiang Yan did not let his guard down at all. Instead, he decisively ordered everyone to attack at the same time, not giving Wushu any chance of survival. In an instant, a bloody light lit up the sky. From afar, it was as beautiful as the sunset. In the end, this piece of pure land in the extreme north was dyed red with blood. Not long after the battle began, Qin Shi, who was patrolling the South Pacific Ocean, suddenly sensed something and looked towards the north. Bai Hong was confused, so she asked curiously, "What's wrong?" "Something's wrong." After that, Qin Shi didn't wait for Bai Hong to respond. Everything was fine just now, but suddenly there was no breath. Bai Hong struggled to reply. This time, he was really sitting at home, but the trouble came from the sky. Bai Hong was, after all, a divine general. Although his cultivation was not even a tenth of it, his 5 senses were still very sharp. Just now, he was meditating in the room to heal his wounds when he suddenly discovered that there was no breath in the west wing. He wanted to go in to check on the situation, but was blocked by the restrictions set up by Qin Shi, so he could only wait in the courtyard for Qin Shi to return. It was fine if Qin Shi did not come back. But this time, he had almost lost his life. In reality, Qin Shi also knew that this matter had nothing to do with Bai Hong. He even guessed that this definitely had something to do with the spirit mirror. Otherwise, who in this world would be able to cause Yingying's soul to scatter without a sound? I'll tell you. If anything happens to Yingying, I'll definitely bury your Tiandu with her. Qin Shi was like an enraged lion, roaring at Bai Hong. Without waiting for Bai Hong to explain, he directly dragged Bai Hong and flew toward the Pacific Ocean. Although Bai Hong was not afraid of death, Qin Ruoying's current situation clearly had something to do with Tiandu, so he more or less felt that he could not face Qin Shi. So, Bai Hong obediently kept his mouth shut, waiting to see what Qin Shi wanted to do next. Qin Shi was angry, but he did not lose his mind because of it. Since Yingying's soul had dissipated, the most important thing now was not to directly find her soul, but to find a way to protect Yingying's physical body. Qin Shi could not stay by Qin Ruoying's side at all times to help her maintain her physical body, so he urgently needed a magic treasure now, and that was Shui Xiang's blue wave silk gauze. Therefore, after arriving at the deep sea cave, Qin Shi frantically poured his vital essence into the large ice block that sealed Shui Xiang. As long as Shui Xiang's injuries were slightly relieved, her frozen state would naturally be lifted. Under Qin Shi's continuous pouring of vital essence, the ice block gradually melted, and Shui Xiang suddenly fell from it. During this period of time, Shui Xiang had been in a state of suspended animation, so she did not know what happened outside. Therefore, the moment she woke up, she directly launched an attack at Qin Shi. Shui Xiang, stop. Seeing this, Bai Hong hurriedly shouted to stop. But Qin Shi's action was much faster than his voice. Shui Xiang did not even use the first move, and Qin Shi had already inserted countless spirit needles into her body. You! Shui Xiang's almond-shaped eyes widened, and after glaring at Qin Shi fiercely, her body completely softened. At this time, Bai Hong on the side let out a long sigh of relief. He was not afraid of death, but he was very afraid of his junior brothers and sisters dying for no reason.